The story begins with the symbol of the Duchy of Cartier, a giant snake, the length of which reaches 4 meters. It is said that the Cartier family was started by a child conceived from the union of such a serpent and a human woman. The people belonging to this house are insanely greedy for power and money precisely because of their lineage. In fact, passion and obsession of this kind are ready to overwhelm anyone. The men of this clan told Alicia that before going into the lair of a predator, one must think 3 times. He asked her not to hold back, so that her moans would become honey to his ears, and the rest would go crazy. The knights standing behind the door were immediately embarrassed when they heard the noise and indecent sounds coming from the room. The girl herself trembled from the kisses, thinking that she had never experienced anything like this in her life. However, she has a goal: to win the favor of this dangerous man and avoid the fate that awaits her. A future destroyed by the struggle for power among the Cartier family, where only death awaits her. That is why she is willing to do anything to survive, and is now in the arms of this man. Before and after her rebirth, this man was the most real and famous madman in the empire. But now he gave her the right to choose, to die in the arms of the serpent, or to undergo the prepared tests. Elisha had to take matters into her own hands, to take advantage of her second chance and survive this time. She encountered the cruel realities of this world when she was still a child, and her parents abandoned her immediately. At the age of 6, she realized that she was not destined to experience parental love. Her mother died of tuberculosis, but Alicia learned to enjoy even the little things, just thinking of herself as an orphan, after all. She didn't live so badly. The girl lived until they stood in her way, a race of omnipresent snakes, ready to devour her entire world. It was the Duchy of Cartier, which appeared so suddenly that Alicia did not even have time to understand anything. Many whispered that Cartier had emerged victorious in the war with the Lore family, although this was only a show. The war was waged to satisfy the appetites of these bastards, because no one in the empire can resist Cartier. To make the wounds that the ducal knight received during the clash with Count Lore a stumbling block is ridiculous. Their desire to possess the land of the Count's family is too obvious, although they are incredibly sorry for that little girl. The man who pushed Alicia ordered her to have manners, because the man in front of her was Duke Jacob, the eldest grandson of the family. The girl raised herself up, hoping that she wouldn't be pushed again, and then turned her gaze to the huge man. He greeted the only surviving descendant of the Lores, congratulating her on becoming a countess. The girl wanted to answer something, as befits a countess, but she was immediately interrupted and thrown a piece of paper, asking her to sign it. Jacob explained that she needed to be paid monetary compensation for the war that started because of her father. Seeing the sum of 30,000 gold, Alicia immediately began to ask where she would get such a huge sum. The man replied that she would act as collateral, and in addition would give him all their lands, but that would not be enough. However, he will generously allow her to work for them, although in this way, she will not pay off the debt by working all her life. He then stated that she had unusually luscious curves, so she could be useful for other types of compensation as well. In the end, he concluded that from that day on, she was Cartier's property, and she had no right to refuse it. Once the signature was received, the judge read the document and recognized Alicia Delore as the county lord. She was 14 when she plunged headlong into the abyss, but managed to take part in the ceremony's circus performance. 11 years later, Elisha was running through the forest while being chased by even Jacob. The running girl with a scar on her face didn't want to take it anymore, while the man called her to him. She ignored the man, continuing to run as fast as she could, hoping not to trip and pass out. She let them abuse her every single day in this place, and now she can't let them kill her. Suddenly, contrary to her hopes, she stumbled. Jacob caught up with her, smiling and saying that it was a wonderful show. Until this moment, she was aware of the situation she was in and lived calmly, but now she suddenly started to kick. The most beautiful one knows that, thanks to the Cartier seal, he will be able to get it even from underground. If she had simply written a will and died peacefully as she was instructed, it would have all ended immediately. The girl loudly asked him to let go, after which she gave him a resounding slap, making the man even more furious. In response, Jacob hit her, asking how the pathetic pledge dared to leave a wound on his master's face. When Elisha fell, her whole life flashed before her eyes, starting with her stay at the Cartier house. She thought only about wanting to live, while the men surrounding her decided that she was dead. After all, initially, they had to set everything up so that it would look like this girl had decided to commit suicide. Elisha didn't go out of her way to have her last breath cut off in the forest in front of these freaks. But when she opened her eyes and sat up, she found herself in bed, and the maid standing next to her noticed this. The girl also asked what was wrong with her, to which she received a surprised answer that she had lost consciousness in front of the temple. At first, she couldn't believe her ears, because she clearly remembers that this event happened about 5 years ago. When she was 19, she went to church before the New Year, but she had not visited it for a long time. Suddenly, Elisha noticed her reflection in the mirror, in which a beautiful girl was looking back at her. Her scar disappeared, after which she tried to get out of bed, but the maid tried to stop her. Without wasting any time, she ran to the window in shock when she heard that the Lord's birthday was coming soon. The servants had to deliver a note with the wishes of the worshippers of the main temple as soon as possible. The courtyard was bustling with activity. Girls said they needed more flowers. Others asked about the guest list. Leaning on the windowsill, Elisha first decided that she had really died and wondered what to do next. Tears welled up in her eyes as she decided that she would have to drag out a miserable existence once again. At the same time, a carriage was heading towards the estate, inside of which sat an important brunette with red eyes. When Elisha went for a walk to the lake, she was noticed by a red-haired girl with a basket of laundry in her hands. She turned around in surprise when she heard a call and a question about her health, since she had recently been unwell. Elisha replied that she was already feeling better, but the redhead was happy because she was worried that she wouldn't be able to go to the party. After all, she is sure that at Lord Cartier's birthday party, Mr. Cartier will not lose face, and it will be grand. The girl assumed that Elisha, too, could not find a place for herself with anticipation, but one had to face the truth. She suggested that her interlocutor not expect too much, since the holiday had nothing to do with them. In their eyes, they are just scum, worthy only of groveling before them, so now they need to finish the job. Redhead replied that she didn't even let her dream, because so many noble families would gather in one place. Suddenly, luck will smile upon them, and one of them will not resist their charm and will decide to pay off the debt by taking it from here. Every maid wants to believe in the fairy tale about how the knight Cartier will refuse the offered mountains of gold. He will also reject the incomparable beauties, choosing only one girl who did the laundry in the estate. After that, they will live happily ever after, even though it was too romantic. But I want to believe in it. Elisha asked her to stop messing around, in response to which she received a question whether she was in a bad mood or not. Whining, the redhead added that she didn't know that people could change so much after a simple blow to the head. Elisha thought that the Cartiers would never be so merciful as to simply grant freedom. Besides, she knew about Lottie's future, who was now looking at her with an innocent and naive look. She, trying to somehow change her situation, seduced Jacob and became his favorite concubine. After this, Lottie asked Elisha to forget that she had once considered her a friend, because now she was only disgracing her. But despite all her ridicule, she became food for his wife's dog, Carol, after only 3 months. Elisha froze, mentally asking herself if she would believe it if she heard what her friend's future would be like. And what good would it do, because she is the creator of her own destiny, so there is no point in interfering with it. The girl decided that she would think only about herself, since it was unlikely that she would get another chance to save her life. And she died no less a miserable death, and this after all the nightmare that she had to endure. Lottie suggested that they go and admire the garden decorations for a while before returning to work. Bowden is worried that someone will accidentally ruin the whole composition, but it will still be okay if they watch. Elisha did not listen to her, thinking that if fate had given her a second chance, then she would never set foot in this hell again. She will create her own destiny with her own hands, and if she drowns, so be it. But at least she will know that she swam to the shore. However, the main question was how she could escape from the clutches of Jacob and his crazy family. Suddenly, she raised her head, noticing in front of her a carriage drawn by black horses, heading in their direction. Lottie noticed with admiration that it was the general's carriage, which could not be confused with any other. There was another one behind her. It was clear that most of the guests were already arriving, although they were driving too fast. The redhead managed to jump to the side, calling Elisha after her, but she didn't make it in time, and the carriage washed her with mud from a puddle. After which, two carriages with black and white horses began to slowly stop not far from them. Lottie ran to her friend, dumbfounded, watching the dirt dripping off her while she stood frozen and did not move. The girl immediately began asking if she was okay, and he noticed that all the washed clothes were wet. Elisha, with tears in her eyes, winced when she heard what sounded like Carol's carriage. Suddenly, the girl grabbed her friend by the hand and then led her behind a tree, hearing the question of what she was doing. At that very moment, a young aristocrat in a pink dress and with a very haughty look emerged from the white carriage. This girl is Jacob's wife, who is a sadist by nature, but no one knows about it. In her past life, she grabbed and began to suspect Elisha of seducing her dear husband. She tried to justify herself with tears, not understanding what was being said. But at that very second, acid was thrown in her face. This girl was the one who had disfigured her face in the past, saying that people like her should get what they deserved. And now Carol turned to the general and said that she was very surprised that she met him exactly like this. Lottie assumed that she had been following his carriage on purpose and was now trying to flirt with him. At the same second, a brunette emerged from another carriage and asked her, with a displeased look, to disappear from sight. In the past, Carol stopped her carriage in exactly the same way, but she had to leave at the request of the head of the family. Elisha then concluded that the past was repeating itself, but it was unclear how to use this to her advantage. She continued to watch the aristocrats, remembering every detail that happened that day. Carol said that they met so well, most likely, fate itself brought them together today. Lucerne replied that he had apparently missed the moment when it became fashionable to stop carriages abruptly on the roads. The girl was shocked by this answer, but quickly apologized, adding that it was all her coachman's fault. She grinned and added that she, too, had been beside herself with fright when he had suddenly stopped in the middle of the road. The man listened to this excuse with indifference, as his attention was suddenly switched to something else. As Carol continued speaking, Lucerne was closely watched by the two girls standing behind the tree. Unable to bear it, he immediately asked who was there, which immediately attracted Elisha's attention, who began to shudder. As she walked forward, she was surprised, because in the past, they had calmly spied on their meeting until they parted. Holding the basket tightly in her hands, the girl tried not to look him in the eyes, deciding that the future was changing. She has no idea why he decided to turn his attention to mere mortals, but there is no way to avoid the conversation. Lucerne asked with indifferent interest if they were not now in the possession of Duke Jacob. Elisha nodded slightly, after which the man noticed the dirt still dripping from her clothes. He decided to ask Carol who these girls were, calmly waiting for an explanation from the aristocrat. She replied with undisguised disgust that they were just dirty servants, after which she took a step back. She added that they were useless lazybones, that they didn't really know how to do anything, but they worked for their family to pay off their debts. These girls are so pathetic and worthless that they are only trusted with easy tasks like washing. Suddenly, she noticed tears on Elisha's face, adding maliciously that it seemed like someone was about to burst into tears. Looking at the girl, Lucerne asked why she was crying, thereby stunning Carol with his behavior. She tried to understand why he cared about this rabble when there was such a beautiful girl standing next to him. Carol asked how they dared to appear in front of important guests like that, because rumors might start to spread. Everyone will talk about how she can't keep an eye on her own servants, and they need to apologize to him. Elisha calmly asked if it would be okay if she took off her dirty clothes right now. Lucerne was surprised, as the girl continued to say that her dress was stained by splashes from the wheels of the carriage. All this dirt has been thrown around because of the recent incident, but they want an apology from her. But she believes that it is not her fault that what happened, and it seems that they only see a problem with her clothes. And if so, then she would simply take it off so as not to cause them discomfort. This stunned Carol. Lottie was also shocked, causing her to ask what had come over her, while the general only smirked. Carol said that in their time, the servants only do what they can to find excuses for everything, and this was too much for her. After all, how dare an impudent girl behave so indecently in front of a great general, and a guest at that? She glanced at the man out of the corner of her eye, but he completely ignored her, heading towards Elisha. He walked slowly towards her with a stony face, while the girl tried to understand what he wanted from her. When the man stopped, he said that he still hadn't received an answer to his question about why she was crying. She replied that it was all because the clothes she had worked so hard to wash had become dirty again. Lucerne said that since he was also involved in this incident, it would help her, and then waved his hand. Taking off his cape, he placed it on the shoulders of the girl, who was surprised by such a noble act. He asked her to cover herself and not reveal her weaknesses, and also not to let anyone stare at her. Suddenly, he moved closer to her ear, whispering that she especially shouldn't do this in this residence. Later in the evening, while in her room, Alicia thought that the day had turned out to be completely unpredictable. Who would have thought that she would come across a man with a terrible reputation in the Empire like this? This man has a heavy, piercing gaze that makes the body tremble and fill with animal fear. He is incredibly similar to the creature that started their race, and the reason for this is the scarlet eyes that look straight into the soul. As their sole owner, he could lay the whole world at his feet, but not everything is so simple. Because of his mother, who had neither lineage nor a noble name, he was never able to become part of the Cartier family. They say that even the current head of the clan, who is known for his heartlessness, sincerely regretted this. Succession in the ducal family is specific, and birth order plays absolutely no role. The leader is chosen through a power struggle, and it was Lucerne who had the most outstanding abilities. He was an ordinary knight, but now, at the age of 25, he has risen to the rank of general, commanding all the knights. All this was achieved by his own efforts, but his goal always remained the head of the Cartier family. He said that when he was a 7-year-old child, he made a vow to himself that he would crush into dust everything that was no longer his. If he wants, Lucerne will destroy the duchy to the ground, which means that this man is dangerous. Lottie suddenly asked her why she was not asleep yet. She started and replied that she was just about to go to bed. Yawning, the red-haired girl replied that her eyes were already closing, so she was going to sleep. Alicia agreed. Even though time has turned on the special, she still owes 30,000 gold and is still in Jacob's clutches. If she tried to escape, the accuracy would help them track her, so it would be a very unsuccessful escape plan. Before she went back in time, she learned some of the secrets that the Cartier kept, and each of them is hungry for something. Jumping up, Alicia decided that she just needed someone angry at Jacob, and with the strength to crush him. Pulling on the general's cape, she added that it had to be someone who could pay off her debt. The only person who has never bullied her, Lucerne, is the one she needs to solve the problem. At this time, the general himself was soaking in the bath, reflecting on the events that had occurred during his arrival. She heard that every time he came to the mansion, Lucerne stayed only in the room where he grew up. It is impossible for the servants to get out of the annex where they currently live, because then they might run away. However, she knows the secret that the walls of this old mansion hold, and which only she knows about. It was a secret passage connecting all the nooks and crannies of the ducal estates, through which one could move. As long as Jacob is alive, Elisha cannot escape the clutches of this damned family, no matter how much she wants to. Even though she was scared, she absolutely had to meet that man to try her luck. Meanwhile, Lucerne was asking himself why things were always happening in this house that were driving him crazy. He remembered, as they say, that before him were girls from fallen noble families who needed to inherit the title. If any of these three can interest him, then the head is counting on his quick wedding. Looking at the girls, Lucerne asked if the old man could not sit still, and what these vile attempts to marry him were. The butler said with a smile that the gentleman insisted that he now needed the title of nobleman. He's just not happy that he can't take part in the battle for power, so he can't wait to marry him off. This way, he will get the right to conquer the territory. But if he really wanted it, he would have got it all long ago. But suddenly, another idea came to his mind, after which he abruptly jumped up from his seat, surprising those present. Taking out his sword, he said that he was very annoyed by this whole situation, so he should just cut it off at the root. Looking at the old man, he asked if the butler could handle it perfectly well on his own. Lying in the bath, Lucerne thought that the old man was sorry that the lands he had captured during the war had gone to the Empire. Playing with a glass of wine and looking at his reflection, he thought that this old man's greed knew no bounds. Suddenly, the image of the maid and her tear-stained face that he had met today appeared before his face. Putting his glass down on the table, he told himself that he had become completely soft since he was showing pity to an ordinary servant. Remembering her figure, he concluded that, in the end, she would not last long at Cartier, no matter how hard she tried. He remembered being told as a child that greed was an unacceptable vice for an illegitimate child. This is a crime against the race. Before the seeds of sin take root, they must all be destroyed with this whip. Grandfather must have decided to arrange such meetings for him every day, and tomorrow he needs to leave this place. Without turning around, the guy said that this was quite unexpected, and he knew perfectly well that he was not alone in the room. He added that these Cartiers do not know how to greet guests at all. At that moment, a man appeared behind him. Meanwhile, Elisha, who was wandering through the dark passages, turned around sharply, looking back questioningly. At that very moment, a strong draft blew, which extinguished her candle and made her feel a little cold. Without a candle, it was pitch dark, even though she had only a little bit left to go, when suddenly her dress got caught. She suddenly flinched when she heard a sound, and the jerk caused her dress to tear, revealing a little of her leg. After that, she decided to pull herself together, because she had only torn her clothes a little, and nothing terrible had happened. After coming so far, you can't back down like a coward over a piece of cloth. A couple of minutes later, she was already at the door of his room and wanted to go inside, but immediately froze. As soon as she opened the door to his room, the man, crossing his arms over his chest, asked what she was doing there. The maid he met during the day, they must have decided that he was interested in her, and so they sent her to him. Then Lucerne asked directly whether this was the work of Carol or Jacob, while looking at her with a terrifying gaze. Elisha immediately became scared and began to justify herself, saying that everything was wrong. But this did not help her. Then she said that she wanted to offer him a deal, and she had information that would definitely interest him. It was a way that would allow him to take the place of the leader, but Lucerne only laughed incredulously in response. He then asked her if she really thought he would believe a girl who showed up there dressed like that. Because of the torn dress, it seemed from the outside that Alicia came with the purpose of seducing him, but everything happened by accident. The man said that of all the spies sent to him, she seemed the stupidest, but the funniest. However, he is not in the best mood now, so he asked to speak faster about who sent her. Then he asked which of them should return her dead body to, but Elisha replied that she had not come on anyone's orders. She decided that she couldn't die like that, so she addressed the man as her beloved Ors. One rainy day, he was born under an arris tree, which is why he got his name. When his mother was pregnant with him, a huge snake, the color of the purest black pearl, appeared to her in a dream. Grabbing Elisha tightly by the throat, the surprised and at the same time embittered Lucerne immediately asked who she was. Elisha remembered how Carol, in her past life, had said that by using this method, Lucerne could become the head of the family. Jacob, bursting into tears, said loudly that no one should ever know about this, under any circumstances. The girl smiled and replied that she had already taken care of everything. That woman had recently breathed her last. Then she added that there was no one left who knew about it. But Elisha heard everything. And now, a breathless Elisha asked if Lucerne wanted to know the real reason for his mother's death. The man looked at her for a few seconds, then let go of her throat and grabbed her hand, dragging her along with him. He then summoned a shadow that was only his to control. It was his ability to control the demonic beast. Black shackles immediately began to encircle the girl's legs, causing her to feel a primal fear. Without taking his eyes off Alicia, Lucerne ordered the shadow to check her for hidden weapons. After some time, he said in surprise that there really was a secret passage in this mansion, through which she passed. Still frightened, the girl answered in the affirmative, adding that she had stumbled upon him purely by chance. It happened when she was wandering around the mansion like a ghost and collecting information bit by bit. Jacob is too careless, so he leaves important documents everywhere, which is what she took advantage of. Lucerne began to doubt whether he really needed the information she was now offering so easily. Elisha replied that he knew his deepest desire, and upon hearing this, the man shuddered slightly. He is eager to take the position of head, and if he does not achieve his goal, he will wipe the entire Cartier family off the face of the earth. Gaining confidence, she added that he would simply destroy anything that could not become his property. Suddenly, the man pressed the girl against the wall, which seriously scared her. leaving her speechless. When asked if she was in a hurry to die, she replied that she just wanted to help him become the head of the family. Looking at her self-confident look, Lucerne smiled and said that he could admit that a way existed. But then he wondered what she expected to get from him in return. Alicia immediately swallowed. She replied that she wanted him to pay her debt, and when asked how big it was, she said 30,000. Holding a glass of wine, the man asked in surprise how it was possible to owe such a huge amount. Elisha explained that these were reparations for the war, and all because her father was a nobleman of the former kingdom. The man replied that he understood everything, which caused an ambiguous and uncertain smile to appear on the girl's face. Lucerne frowned, adding that everything she had told him here was just empty words so far. After which he asked if she had any material evidence. The girl immediately became dejected. He also asked her if she thought that in his eyes she was now a fraud who had accidentally found out about his mother. Elisha guessed that it would not be easy, but she did not think that Lucerne would not care at all about her proposal. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her neck, after which she realized that her Cartier mark had been activated. Jacob noticed that she was now in Lucerne's chambers, saying that he should have been the first to taste her. Then he turned menacingly to the knights, demanding that they immediately bring the magician to him, and they immediately obeyed. A couple of minutes later, the knights at the man's door were shouting that they had heard that a fugitive had gotten into the general's house. They needed to check his quarters. Lucerne told the frightened Alicia that they had come for her. Clutching her head in hysterics, the girl could not believe that everything would really end like this. Then she grabbed Lucerne, asking him to make her at least his servant, because she was ready for anything. Suddenly, she screamed, asking why she, who had worked so hard and put in so much effort. Hysteria completely consumed her as she loudly asked how much longer she would have to suffer in this hell. And why is the title of countess needed at all if she still cannot pay off her debts and live freely? Looking at the completely dejected girl, the man asked if she was a countess, surprised by such a turn of events. Taking her chin gently, he asked with interest whether her father had been an earl and whether she had inherited his title. At that very moment, the knights behind the door apologized to Lucerne, saying that they would have to enter by force. But contrary to their promises, the knights behaved uncertainly, as they did not dare to break into the general's chambers. At this time, Lucerne pressed the girl against the wall, and then began to slowly pull down the straps of her dress, frightening her. With a serious look, he declared that, from now on, she would belong only to him, and she could not hold back. Now he wants her moans to become a delight for his ears, and all the people standing behind the door to go crazy from them. Then none of them would dare to enter this room. Meanwhile, the knights continued their attempts. Breathing hard, Elisha began to push him away, stuttering as she asked him to stop because she couldn't do this. The man decided to counter-argument by asking if she was really eager to return to Jacob. It worked, causing the girl to gain much more confidence in asking to be taken for real. Observing the sudden change in her behavior, the general smiled, replying that there was no need to ask for it. Meanwhile, Jacob was cursing loudly, asking how Lucerne dared to disgrace him like that. Then he bared his teeth, thinking angrily that he would definitely pay for humiliating him in front of his whole family. After some time, Lucerne said that now they could finally calmly finish what they had talked about earlier. Alicia thought that those people really did not dare to enter the general's chambers once they heard her groans. But now the man asked her to tell him everything she knew, asking how much she knew about his mother. The girl replied that she couldn't reveal all her cards to him yet, no matter how much he demanded it of her. With all the turmoil today, she would no longer be able to survive in this place without his protection, and she needed guarantees. He must ensure her safety, and in return, she will tell him everything she knows, along with evidence. The man asked her if she thought it was unfair, since she hadn't done anything yet, but was already demanding payment. Elisha replied that today he had dealt a direct blow to Jacob's reputation, and people would laugh at him, all because he couldn't keep track of his property, and these words will become the strongest poison for him. She blushed, waiting for an answer, when suddenly she shuddered, hearing that Lucerne was ready to give her 30,000 gold. Suddenly, he pulled her towards him, declaring that in return, he wanted her to agree to marry him. Looking at her stunned face, he added that he wanted to do it today, right now, embarrassing her. The next day, a family meeting was called, during which Jacob decided to voice his indignation. He shouted and complained that Lucerne was too brazen in his covetousness of the girl who rightfully belonged to him. The young man added that this time he had gone too far by deciding to take over the family's property. Jacob persisted, saying that by law they should both be flogged first and then have their hands cut off. Lucerne replied that the chief had been insisting for a long time that he marry a woman with a noble title. Rising from his seat with a bang, he added that he had simply followed his will and chosen a bride for himself. Yesterday, they and this maid, who now works for Jacob, decided to get married. And as confirmation of their intentions, they spent the night together. This statement stunned those present. The chief winced, saying that this was after he had mercilessly sent away all the girls he had selected. He then asked if Lucerne had decided to make fun of their race, to which he immediately received a negative answer. It's just that the women sent by his grandfather were of high rank, and we were too good for him. Besides her title, he must be confident that he can control her and eliminate her if necessary. Besides, he was more interested in money than in her, so she would not have stayed with him. She had to pay 30,000 gold, and sooner or later, she would have been sold to a brothel anyway. Since what he considered treasure was just trash to him, is there any reason to object at all? Suddenly, the leader asked him to stop, waving his hand sharply and asking what 30,000 gold he was talking about. Jacob grimaced when he heard the question of where such a huge debt came from for one single girl. Lucerne explained that these were reparations for the war, since his bride was an aristocrat of the former kingdom and the daughter of a count. The head asked how much he had inflated these reparations, since he had not confiscated her land, but had added such a sum. Jacob tried to answer his grandfather, but he loudly stated that he had told him to address him as the leader. The man eventually decided to close the case by recalculating the debt and having Lucerne pay the corresponding amount. Suddenly, Lucerne gave up the idea, saying that he would not belittle the value of that girl's life and would pay everything. After that, he decided to deviate, since he had already received the head's permission, so he would start preparing for the wedding. Suddenly, the leader stopped him, after which he stated with a serious expression that he would have one condition for him. Meanwhile, Elisha was changing into an expensive dress, and Lucerne's close knight helped to button it. At that very moment, the general entered the girl's room, noticing that she had become much more beautiful. A little earlier, Elisha was lying in bed, which Lucerne was just about to begin negotiations with his family. Jacob will probably protest fiercely, but he will have a hard time competing with such an opponent. If everything goes smoothly, it could mean that she will finally be ours, closer to her long-awaited freedom. She remembered saying yesterday that she knew he needed a woman of noble birth, but there are plenty of other girls around who are ready to throw themselves on his neck, even though it will damage his reputation. She just wanted him to put her mind at ease, but at that very moment the man interrupted her, saying that she was wrong. With a smile on his face, he stated that he chose her for a different reason. It was all about the information she had. If she can prove her worth, she will be rewarded, and when the time comes, he will grant her a divorce. However, if she lies to him or turns out to be Jacob's spy, then things will take a very sad turn. The girl turned around with a serious look, confidently answering that this would not happen and she would prove it to him. The general frowned, pointing his finger at her, saying that she had better not disappoint him, otherwise it would be bad. Lucerne really didn't hand her over to Jacob, but it seems he's now decided to use her for his own interests. Until she finds out what's on his mind, he can't be trusted, no matter how sweet his words. While in her room, Elisha heard a knock on the door. Not knowing who needed to come to her, a guy and a girl entered the room and greeted the girl, introducing themselves as Nora and Ian. These were Lucerne's confidants, the Knights of the Black Lion, an order headed directly by the general. Ian apologized because due to the rush and the lack of a personal maid, he would be the one helping her today. He had only worked in intelligence before, but he could handle this. Surprised, Elisha replied that it was okay, since she had never had help with her packing anyway. The Black Lion is an order under the control of Lucerne and is made up of knights he personally trained. The girl glanced at Ian out of the corner of her eye. She knew him from a past life, although they had never met in person. He is popular with noble ladies because of his cute face. That's all she knows. But Nora is one of the few female knights in the Empire who once met her. When Elisha could barely move, Nora politely offered her a handkerchief, saying that she was bleeding. She handed over a piece of paper and invited Elisha to look at it once she had finished her preparations. She was surprised by the contract. But at that very second, Lucerne entered the room, asking Ian why he was there. The guy replied that they couldn't find anyone who could help his bride with her hair and makeup. After this, the man began to look closely at Elisha, realizing that his subordinate had not lied. Without telling her anything, he turned to Nora and asked if she had signed the contract, but she replied that she had not had time. At this time, Alicia looked at herself in the mirror, thinking that this was the first time she was wearing something so expensive. Lucerne immediately noticed the girl's uncertain behavior, staring at her thoughtfully. He then waved his hand, declaring that his knights were free to go, and they left the room. Elisha hesitated and thought that such clothes did not suit her, since Lucerne did not compliment her. But at that very second, the man approached her and pulled her into his arms, which made the girl embarrassed. Then he smiled and declared with delight that this dress was the best he had seen her in so far. Surprised by this reaction, Elisha became even more embarrassed, after which she asked him not to exaggerate. Removing his hands, the general agreed, adding that he would eagerly wait to see what else she would show him. He then asked that since she was already dressed up, shouldn't they finish signing their contract? Sitting down on the sofa, Elisha concluded that he was playing with her, but the man asked her to quickly end it all. Jacob's men should arrive in about half an hour, and by that time they should resolve all issues. She read that the bride, Elisha Delore, had no right to seek divorce during the entire period of marriage. Every day spent in the marriage itself, the total amount of the bride's debt will increase by 10%. And if the reason for the divorce is recognized, she will be forced to return 30,000 gold. If the basis for divorce is another factor, arising from the bride's behavior, Elisha will give up her freedom. The girl did not understand whether this was a joke. By signing this contract, she was practically condemning herself to slavery. The girl immediately frowned and doubted, after which she firmly stated that she would not sign this contract. Lucerne replied that until recently, she had been ready to do anything, but her opinion had changed very quickly. With the utmost seriousness, Elisha said that her decision to follow him was still unchanged. However, at this very moment, she was demanding a revision of the terms of this contract, which did not suit her. The man frowned, asking if she had decided to impose her own rules here. Although he did not like to bargain, the girl replied that the entire meaning of the contract boiled down to the fact that sooner or later she would definitely betray him, and if he left not ready to trust her, it's better to just interrogate her, having first fed her truth serum. Lucerne was surprised by her assertiveness, because even his angry and stern look could not convince her. Clutching his head, he said wearily that he had no idea what was going on in her mind right now. He then calmly asked what she wanted, hearing in response the question of when they could divorce. Lucerne replied that this would happen as soon as he found a replacement for her, or she would become completely useless. The girl concluded that when he took over his head, he would no longer need her, and she could be free. The man asked her if she knew that an illegitimate child's attempt to take over the position of head of the family was treason. Elisha asked in response who would guarantee that they would be able to survive if Jacob or Marco became the leader. He knew this perfectly well, but despite this, a barely noticeable smile suddenly appeared on his face. He then asked if these were all the conditions, and Elisha immediately asked that the clause on adultery be removed as well. And if he's going to use her name to conduct his business, it has to be a legitimate business. Lucerne said with surprise and suspicion that she was now speaking about it in a somewhat too specific manner. He assumed that this was not the first time she had encountered something like this, which caused the girl to shudder involuntarily. After the contract was rewritten, Elisha was able to sign with peace of mind. A little tired, the man asked if she was happy now. Carefully studying her expression, the girl looked frowning, but in her heart she was glad of such conditions, and therefore nodded with satisfaction. The man asked her not to forget that even if some points had disappeared, it did not make her freer. Elisha was surprised to see him take her hand, blushing and embarrassed. She answered in the affirmative. Taking the contract in his hands, Lucerne asked whether the marriage should now be formalized, as befits spouses. 3 days later, a wizard arrived to deal with the mark on the girl's neck, left by the Cartier family. When the old man put it away, he immediately asked Lucerne what to do with the tracking magic that remained. The man immediately began to release the dark essence, and replied that he would simply feed it all to his shadow. After that, one of the shadow snakes sank its teeth into Alesha's neck, who flinched, feeling a little pain. Trying to look at the new mark, she thought that Lucerne would be able to find it wherever she went. Now she really wanted to look at the new mark, but her own eyes could not allow her to do so. Suddenly, the general declared that if they wanted to leave here on foot, they had to look away and walk away. Frightened, the servant and the wizard began to literally run out of the room so as not to anger Lucerne. Meanwhile, Elisha walked over to the mirror and pushed her hair aside, beginning to examine the new mark. She sighed and felt a little better, when suddenly a man's heavy hand fell on her shoulder. He said that everyone around was interested in her, and that she had paid 30,000 gold for her, and the talk was not dying down. They must have just suspected something was wrong, which is why the chief insisted on holding the wedding ceremony. Looking at Elisha's mark, Lucerne said that it was a bit annoying, deciding to put another one by biting it. The next day, during the wedding, the priest asked the bride and groom to go to the sacred altar. Elisha still couldn't believe that she would actually become Lucerne's wife, having managed to escape from Jacob. Now she was dressed in a luxurious wedding dress, but she could not help but notice the mocking glances of the guests. The Cartier family thought that the slaves were completely out of place and needed a few blows to set them straight. They found it funny that she wished you a good life, but such insects cannot even dream of it. The most dissatisfied of all was the leader, who was silent, but his face spoke for itself. At that moment, Elisha tried to look at the floor, trying to overcome her fear, but the heavy looks prevented her. Noticing her anxiety, Lucerne declared that he had placed this mark, and it should not be forgotten that from now on it was only his. The girl was surprised when he suggested that she proudly straighten her shoulders and behave as befits his wife. She thought for a moment, agreeing with the man, and deciding that she was no longer the same Elisha she had been before. Now, in her new role, in front of the people who wiped their feet on her, she will stand with her head held high. Could Elisha have imagined that after a horrific death, she would be lucky enough to get another chance? Meanwhile, standing at the altar, the priest asked that their sacred marriage vows be read before God. Now the girl will be able to start a new life, and besides, Lucerne will be there as her husband. She will never miss this chance given to her by fate, the chance to take revenge on this damned family. She wants to get even with them for ruining her life, because now she has a great opportunity. The man put a ring on her finger, and the girl realized that soon she would finally be able to become free. Today, on the 995th anniversary of the founding of the empire, a priest blesses Lucerne de Kayak and Elisha de Lore. After the official ceremony, a banquet began, where many guests dined and socialized with each other. The leader sat separately from everyone on his personal throne, and next to him stood Lucerne, waiting for a conversation. The gray-haired man put his head on his hand and said that he didn't really understand his true motives. But since he entered into a marriage that he had been avoiding in every possible way, it means that his wife had managed to hook him with something worthwhile. With an indifferent face, the general replied that she was quite an interesting person, and that was what intrigued him. Looking at Elisha, his eyes stated that a girl worthy of 30,000 gold could not be uninteresting. However, only time will tell if she really deserves them, or if she is just a stupid empty shell. Meanwhile, the girl examined the bones of the saint, the head of a dragon, and various paintings by famous artists. And all these precious treasures were simply put on display at the banquet for everyone to see. She suddenly flinched when Ariane, Marco's wife, asked with a smile what she was looking at so intently. In front of her now were gifts prepared by the headman's grandchildren, especially for his birthday. The head of the Cartier family had 3 sons, and only his second child is currently alive. Having received the rank of priest in the temple, he strives for the title of Great Pope, the absolute pinnacle of temple authority. He dedicated himself to religion, but in the struggle for power within the family, he left his son, Marco, in his place. Ariane, the granddaughter of the Great Pope before last, also helps him achieve the desired position of head of the family. Once they even kidnapped Elisha, mistaking her for Jacob's confidant, and tried to beat information out of him. Then the girl got it badly, and it was Marco who beat her personally, who spared no effort to maim her. He said she was resilient. He wondered if she really didn't know, or if she was that loyal to Jacob. Arian replied that such people could only grovel before others and silently follow any instructions. Now she said that she was unsure whether she had ever seen such treasures with her own eyes before. Elisha thought that her nasty character and contemptuous attitude towards others had not changed at all. She said that all the things here were prepared for the head, but each one was a rare treasure. Of particular note is the bone fragment belonging to the holy prophet Listramp, of whom she had heard. This is one of those things that shows the ugly underbelly of temple life using the relics of saints. When she finished explaining, Arian smiled and remarked that Elisha was quite perceptive. Then she smugly declared that it was a gift prepared for the head by her husband personally. Suddenly, they both turned around, hearing a quiet cry that belonged to Carol, and Jacob was standing next to her. The worried man asked what was wrong with her, to which he received the answer that she was simply very happy. Carol stated that he knew perfectly well that they had been the ones taking such good care of Elisha all this time. Now she understands that the girl under their care has met such a wonderful groom. Smiling, she added that she was very touched, and now she so wanted Elisha to be loved. Not understanding why such words were said, the girl still thanked her previous owner. However, she interrupted her, adding that she was mistaken, after which she began to quickly head in her direction. Carol added that at the meeting, Lucerne said that the reason for his proposal was simple pity. After all, she is a powerless poor girl from a fallen family who has no chance of returning to a normal life. She allegedly quoted him as asking if it was too cold and cruel for her beloved fiancé. Then she turned away, asking if it didn't break his heart with sadness that there was no hint of love between the spouses. Arian said with surprise that she didn't know such details, after which she added that she was truly sorry. Noticing Lucerne's attentive gaze, Elisha decided to tell Carol that she was too arrogant. Arrogance among the nobility is considered a lack of dignity, and in each couple the relationship will manifest itself in its own way. Then she asked her why she thought that if her family was now penniless, her husband could not love her. Besides, how could they bring up her family at their wedding, since it's not a happy topic? Hearing this, Jacob immediately cleared his throat, realizing that this girl might say too much now. However, Elisha did not calm down, asking if they had all forgotten how exactly Count Lore died. Meanwhile, the leader listened attentively to their conversation, but was in no hurry to intervene, glancing at the girl. Suddenly, Jacob could not stand it any longer, and became furious, loudly asking Elisha how she dared to reproach their family. He waved his hand, asking if she was implying that Cartier owed her family an apology. The girl closed her eyes, preparing herself for something to hit her, but a second later, nothing happened. Opening her eyes, she noticed Lucerne, who grabbed him and calmly stated that he had no manners. The man frowned, adding that he wanted to remind them not to raise their voice in the presence of the boss. Jacob didn't like this action and asked him what he was doing, surprising Elisha and Carol. The wife asked if he was okay, but the man asked, how dare someone like him treat him like that? Carol told the chief that such an act was not at all typical of the general, and it was possibly the influence of his wife. As soon as she appeared, quarrels immediately began in their family, and this was very frightening. But the head did not answer. Everyone clearly understood that Carol wanted to show Lucerne's new wife in the most unflattering light, but they remained silent. Suddenly, Elisha called out to her, with a smile on her face, deciding that she should first apologize to the leader herself. Throwing her hand away, the surprised girl immediately asked what she was talking about, since she had done nothing wrong. Elisha explained that as the wife of the eldest child in the famous Cartier family, she showed her tears to those around her. And on top of that, she immediately went to seek help from the head, even without being able to resolve the conflict that had arisen on her own. The girl remembered how, in her past life, the leader told her that it is not the one who walks over others who is sinful, only he who resigns himself to his own weakness, without trying to cope with it by his own efforts, is sinful. Then she beamed, adding that such weakness of character was very much like an unforgivable sin. Since she has lived under the yoke of this family for a long time, she can easily find the words for the chapter. Meanwhile, the older man thought that she did not succumb to provocations and was able to soberly assess the situation. He also really likes the way she thinks, but he thinks that it's worth arranging one more final test. Meanwhile, Carol was mentally asking herself, how dare this girl shame her right in front of the boss? Marco, you said that Alicia turns out to be damn interesting, and Lucerne's insight is simply top-notch. Arian asked him not to exaggerate, because before them was an ordinary slave who had forgotten her despicable place. Suddenly, the headman declared that they were all very noisy, after which he asked the three girls to come closer to him. He stated that he happily accepted all the gifts they had prepared, each of them being a valuable item. Carol proudly began to say that they had prepared for him the 34th fantasy of the great artist. Her husband had gone to incredible lengths to get it, and now, this painting belonged to the head. Then, Arian spoke up, saying that in order to take care of his health, they spent a lot of time searching. However, they were able to find a bone fragment of the Holy Prophet Listramp, which grants longevity to its owner. And now the father-in-law is making every effort to obtain the place of the great pope and become his new power. The main reason Merha is targeting this position is to make Marco the head of the Cartier family. But the current leader, on the contrary, does not want to see Mer as the great pope, which means their plan is not so ideal. However, Arian said with a pitiful look that he could only help them a little in this matter. The man waved his hand, replying that in a couple of years, they would have such an opportunity anyway. He then turned his gaze to Alicia, asking what she had to say about her husband's gift. Gathering all her strength and confidence, the girl replied that, in fact, this was the first time she had seen something like this, and this gift was prepared without her participation, so she cannot say anything special or flattering. But she had previously heard about the head of a dragon that was caught 3 years ago, and this time the head was much smaller. He's probably planning on getting a bigger dragon for his 80th birthday and decided to go in order of size. She thinks that with his gift, he wanted to say that the leader should remain healthy and full of strength until that moment. Elisha turned her head towards Arian, adding that in a couple of years, a huge and strong dragon would appear. Meanwhile, the leader, who had been silently listening to her, suddenly laughed loudly, satisfied with her answer. He told Lucerne that his chosen one was not as simple as she seemed, and he replied that he had already spoken about this before. The general added that the day was not far off when he would say that 30,000 gold was too small a price for her. The leader asked her name again, and then mentally asked you where she had been hiding all this time. Then he smiled contentedly, saying that from now on, she could drop in on him even without a special reason. It would be wonderful to talk to her from time to time. At that very moment, Carol and Arian were looking at her enviously. Elisha immediately smiled, realizing that even the other girls in the family were not allowed such an honor. After the family banquet had come to an end, Lucerne and Elisha headed towards the harnessed carriage. The satisfied man turned to his wife, saying that thanks to her, he enjoyed a family gathering for the first time. Then he extended his hand to her, saying that today they still had to spend their wedding night. She gave him her hand with an uncertain movement, when suddenly they turned around, hearing a loud cry from the balcony. It was Jacob who loudly insulted Elisha, apparently not afraid of Lucerne, who heard everything perfectly well. I was going down the steps. The man was shouting that here she was, her gratitude for the fact that they fed and clothed her, and Lucerne is content with the dirty girl he picked up after he used her and threw her away. At the end, he asked them to go to hell, and the general asked her to watch carefully what was about to happen. He then walked slowly but confidently towards Jacob, causing the plump man to flinch. Lucerne walked up to him and rolled up his sleeves, punching him in the face, causing blood to gush from his nose and leaving a bruise on his cheek. At that moment, before she left this rotten place that had become a living hell for her, she heard words. Her husband, whose face was slightly stained with blood, smiled and solemnly congratulated her on her wedding. And although these words were quite simple, in reality, they turned out to be the most exciting congratulations. Sitting in the carriage, Lucerne said that today they would stay at a hotel, and tomorrow they would go to a mansion in the capital. Elisha listened to him attentively, but she could not calm down, and her heart was pounding feverishly. Maybe it was because someone hit Jacob for the first time in front of her, and it made her happy. She thought for a moment, then turned to the general, asking if weakness was a sin. The man was surprised by her question and thought for a few seconds, after which he answered firmly and affirmatively. Alicia frowned, concluding that the man sitting in front of her was just like the other Cartiers. But how stupid it was to think for even a second that he hit Jacob because of her, wanting to protect her. She imagined that she had become his real wife, but in reality they were only connected by a contract and nothing more. Lucerne asked if she expected a different answer, but the girl replied that she asked the first thing that came to mind. She also touched on this topic in the presence of the head, trying to win his favor, and she was honest about this. Her main goal is to survive, so her useless emotions will not stand in his way and will not tie his hands and feet. We must try hard to maintain a relationship based on mutual use of each other. Suddenly, the man reached out his hand to her, stroked her cheek, and said that she was so fragile and helpless. The general smiled, asking how it was possible to look at her and hate weakness, which made Alicia shudder. Then he asked her not to probe him, because every time she does it, he wants to eat her. After this, the man gave her a kiss, showing her that he had not married solely for the sake of profit. Meanwhile, in another carriage were Lapis and Lazuli, wizards of the Black Lion Order, who were twins. Lapis cried loudly and shouted that the general had bought himself a bride, which was unthinkable, and the younger one tried to calm him down. Corin, a knight of the order, asked why his wife had to be Jacob's subordinate. Nora calmly asked what they were thinking, since she was not bought as a slave, and even more so, she was not a spy. They started asking her if she had met her, and if she herself had said that she had not been forced into marriage. She was also asked if the girl looked like the type of person who might stab someone in the back. Ian decided to take the floor, replying that the girl was very quiet and modest, and did not give the impression of being a bad person. Besides, they don't think that the general is the kind of person who can be easily fooled. At that very moment, the others suddenly calmed down, concluding that Ian was right, and this was something out of the realm of fantasy. Suddenly, they rebelled again, shouting that he had not told them that he was getting married, and had not invited them to the wedding. Lapis, unable to hold back his tears, shouted that the general was simply neglecting them. He did not want to leave it like that. When the general's carriage arrived at the estate, the knights and wizards looked at the man helping his wife. Lucerne asked to take her hand, while his stunned subordinates asked who this kind and considerate man was. Suddenly, the general picked up Alicia in his arms, but she awkwardly declared that she could walk on her own. She looked guiltily at the knights, thinking that she needed to show them her best side. Meanwhile, the knights and wizards noticed the bruise from the kiss on her neck, wondering what happened in the carriage. In shame, Alicia buried her face in Lucerne's shoulder, deciding that this was a complete failure. But the man did not understand her panic. An excited hotel worker ran out to them, saying that it was a great honor for them to receive the general and his wife. He wanted to invite them to visit different places, but Lucerne replied that this was their wedding night. Then he added menacingly that if anyone bothered them today, his head would immediately fly off his shoulders. A few minutes later, they entered a luxurious room that was incredibly similar to the royal chambers. When they changed, the man immediately carefully laid his wife on the bed, thereby creating comfort. Elisha thought that they would do it right now, and Lucerne asked with a smile where they should start. The general approached her to kiss her, but suddenly a dull sound was heard, which made the girl embarrassed. Elisha began to justify herself by saying that she wanted the dress to fit her well, so she had not eaten since the morning. The man concluded that they needed to have lunch first. Otherwise, he would blame himself for his wife not finishing her meal. The girl was embarrassed by this turn of events, realizing that it was because of her that such an important moment was missed. A little while later, Alicia decided to take a bath, and for the first time in a long time, she felt warm and cozy. Until that moment, she couldn't even imagine that she would ever be able to feel calm again. In her past life, her face was disfigured by a terrible scar, so she didn't expect something like this. Because of this, she was accustomed only to sidelong glances from people who did not hide their disdainful opinions. Looking at her miserable life, she thought it would be better to immediately bury any hopes for her own happiness. It was very strange for her, and now she felt very unusual, as her life had changed in an instant. Suddenly, we shuddered, hearing Lucerne's voice, who asked what was wrong with her, and then asked her to leave. If she continued to sit here and fill her head with useless thoughts, their wedding night would come to an end. He then added that she was too thin. Alicia replied that this did not prevent her from fulfilling her marital duties. When the man threw a robe over her, he decided to ask if she had already decided to show her thorns. But the next second, he immediately faltered and was surprised, looking at the change in his wife's mood. Lucerne asked why she was crying and if she was scared, and the girl thought that his hand was very warm and pleasant. Although his voice and facial expressions seem cold, when he is around her, he looks completely different. And while this man is next to her, she absolutely does not understand her feelings, and now she wants to kiss him. After a few minutes, they broke off their passionate kiss to take a closer look at each other's eyes and lips. Suddenly, the general asked if they had met before, a question that made Elisha flinch. He explained that every time she looked at him, her eyes seemed filled with guilt. The man then frowned and asked suspiciously what she was hiding, calling her a little ghost along the way. However, a loud stomping outside the door prevented the girl from answering, causing them both to turn around in surprise. A loud voice of a knight was heard from behind the door, calling for the general, saying that monsters were approaching from behind the mountains. Having quickly dressed, Lucerne asked his wife to stay here for now and not to go out until he gave her permission. Usually, these creatures go berserk in the spring, under the influence of the power of magical stones, but suddenly they appeared now. The knight explained that the uprising was to blame for everything. Most likely, the survivors of the fallen kingdom awakened the monsters. The Soji estate has already been captured, and it looks like they're planning to take control of the area around the gate. Elisha knew that the rebellion would fail in any case, and the status of Lucerne, which had suppressed it, would rise significantly. The surrounding territories were ready to send reinforcements, but the commander-in-chief's position was still vacant. They have a week to get the job done, but Lapis noticed that the general was in a very bad mood. Corin replied that it was understandable that he was interrupted on his wedding night, although what could such a boy know? Ian and Lasley would go with Lucerne, while Nora, Corin, and Lapis were tasked with delivering his wife to the capital. The guys immediately started insisting that it was unfair, since the three of them should be responsible for the escort. The general did not like this tone, which made him angry and asked if he had allowed them to say anything. Elisha watched in surprise as an irritated Lapis, dissatisfied with the order, looked after the general. The girl smiled and nodded at him, but the wizard decided to ignore her, turning away angrily. She understood that for knights such treatment was tantamount to exile, and it was strange to expect any other reaction. He asked Lucerne to watch her behavior when she arrived in the capital and to remember that they were not finished yet. He then asked her to be ready the night he returned, so that they could continue what they had started. The girl looked worried and then wished him luck, knowing that they would not see each other for a long time. A couple of days later, they arrived in the capital, approaching the Lucerne estate, which was simply huge. When Alicia got out of the carriage, she couldn't take her eyes off the mansion, trying to see everything at once. At that very second, someone pushed her painfully in the shoulder, after which she noticed Lapis walking discontentedly. And for everyone here, she is just a big woman, only in words having noble status, being the wife of a general. A butler came out to her and called himself Henri, adding that if she needed anything, she could contact him. The girl took a deep breath, after which she tried to convince herself that everything was okay and she could handle it, after which she told the butler that she wanted to see the training ground where the knights train. The man was surprised by such a sudden request, since the new owner of the house had not even had time to properly settle in yet. When asked if she was sure, Alicia answered yes, deciding that she would show everyone that she could be useful too. Henry said that the training ground was not a place for a noble lady like her to visit. Most of the soldiers are still absent due to the current situation, and the troops are now under the command of a general. He advised her to take a look at the residence after hearing the question of whether the site was part of it. Suddenly, the butler started, bowed, and said that he had gone too far, and then offered to show him the way. After some time, they reached the training ground, when suddenly the soldiers immediately noticed the girl from the rumors. They whispered among themselves that they thought the general would be all alone for the rest of his life. Then, Henry led the girl into the kitchen, showing her everything and introducing her to the cook, saying that food for the soldiers was prepared here. Elisha immediately began to study the menu asking if they would be serving this today, and the chef nodded in the affirmative. Henry, meanwhile, noticed Elisha's straight posture, but rough hands, as well as a face completely devoid of emotion. He thought that she was the same as all those fallen aristocrats who were left with only useless pride. However, now he had to admit that his judgment was wrong, and now she looked like a mistress. Elisha listened to the cook with a serious expression, drawing some conclusions for herself, hoping to improve the soldiers' conditions. A little later, Henri said that because of the small number of servants, the house might seem untidy to her. However, they paid special attention to preparing the room for the lady so she should rest from the journey. He was told that, having crossed the gate, they found themselves here in just 2 days, and such a long journey must have tired her. Suddenly, they heard a loud cry in front of them, and someone was asking if it was really that hard to follow the pig. Meanwhile, the fleeing animal, with a mark on its hip, stopped abruptly, looking at the girl in shock. Lapis immediately pounced on the pig, asking if it would continue to escape from his lab. Elisha immediately gave him a good-natured smile, but the guy only responded with a displeased look. A surprised Henri shouted after the displeased wizard that he should have greeted his mistress. The butler asked not to be angry with him, because he was only 14 years old, but he was already one of the 97 wizards. The girl calmly replied that she understood everything and knew that there was no point in forcing wizards to be polite. The stunned butler asked if she had ever had to deal with them before, since she knew their habits. Elisha didn't answer, but instead just smiled, leaving the butler to ponder the matter. When they entered the mansion, the girl was shocked by what was happening inside. There was the famous Fivachan world clock, which counted time for another 533 years, according to the imperial calendar. She also noticed flowers forged from pure gold, and even the vase underneath them was an ancient and valuable relic. And each of the paintings is a masterpiece, a cherished dream of any collector, which costs an unrealistic amount of money. However, now she was trying to understand what the hell was going on with the house itself, which was in disarray. Henri explained that every time a general returned victorious, he was given something valuable as a reward. However, as a person who is absolutely not interested in art, he doesn't care where these gifts are. He asked her not to worry, as the things that were truly important were kept in the treasury. If they can't take proper care of the valuables in front of them, it's scary to imagine what's going on in the treasury. At that very moment, Elisha rolled up her sleeves, saying that things wouldn't go this way, and the first thing she would do was clean up. Several days later, the butler still could not believe that the house could have been transformed so much in 3 days. Now the interior of the mansion was shining, and it seemed as if there was much more space in the room. He remembered asking her on the very first day if she was going to go and greet the servants in person. Elisha replied that, instead of distracting them from their work, it would be better if she came to them herself. After this, the girl walked around the mansion, studying the rooms, while at the same time greeting the surprised servants. Suddenly, one of the maids accidentally caught a vase and closed her eyes, deciding that this was the end for her. But when she opened her eyes, she noticed that Elisha had caught her, asking her to be careful in the future. The maid could not believe that she did not receive a reprimand, but on the contrary, she felt cared for by her mistress. Henri thought that although only a little time had passed, the atmosphere in the mansion had changed significantly. He was sure that it was all because the house finally had a mistress who really knew her business. Elisha, I said. After checking the trading book, she noticed that it would be possible to reduce costs a little more. When asked if she knew how to read a trade book, she replied that the abbess of the monastery, Rosaria, had taught her. The man asked if it was possible that she was talking about that very war heroine, after which everything became clear to him. Suddenly, he realized that he had only just now noticed how incredible, very smart, and insightful the lady was. In fact, the more he learns about her, the more amazed he is, and it was all in a positive way. It will be interesting to see how much this house, and along with it all its inhabitants, will change under her influence. Meanwhile, in the knight's dining room, they said that she was running everything as if she had lived there for 10 years. Lapis listened with displeasure, as they said that Layla praised her for her kindness to the servants. His ears almost withered. While everyone continued to discuss Elisha, the young wizard could barely contain his anger, but his patience came to an end. Then he suddenly jumped up, shouting that he didn't care whether it was the mistress of the house or anyone else, but he couldn't recognize her. Meanwhile, Elisha herself walked confidently into their dining room to greet them personally. Corin put his arm around Lapis's shoulder, asking with a sly smile how he could swallow such food. If all this had dried up, it would have definitely looked like the food given to prisoners 9 times out of 10. Nora asked him to stop being picky. He replied that no one could understand someone who had been in prison. It would be another matter if they were given such food on the battlefield. Then at least he could feel better. Then he would have cut down the rebels one by one. But now he wondered why the hell they weren't invited there. He didn't understand what was so special about what they needed to protect here in the mansion, and this question angered Lapis again. He shouted that he was already furious that they had separated him from Lasley, and now he had to drag himself here on a day off. Because of her, he cannot go to the battlefield, and therefore, whether the mistress of the house or anyone else, he will never recognize her. At that very moment, the door opened, and the wizard noticed with surprise that Elisha had come here completely alone. Earlier, Elisha told Henri that today was the day when the general was supposed to dine with his knights. Normally, she would sit there next to him, but since he is absent now, she goes there alone. The butler was surprised, asking if she was sure that this behavior might seem rude and inappropriate to her. The girl replied that during the time spent in the mansion, she had already met many friendly subordinates. None of them were cruel or used foul language, and they all obeyed her orders. Henry wondered whether he should tell her that they had been forced to observe elementary standards of decency. Hearing that they were friendly, he decided to ask her if she was sure they were talking about the same people. He decided to clarify that Ian was on the verge of drug poisoning, Nora was secretive, and Corin was in prison. It was quite funny to hear all this from him, because he himself used to be a knight who became famous as an executioner. Corin was surprised that she laughed. In her place, ordinary aristocrats would have definitely been frightened and started shedding tears. He was struck by the courage of the girl who approached the table and greeted the knights and the wizard with a smile. Alicia asked Lapis in surprise why he was here. The boy asked in response if there was any problem with it. She replied that, according to paragraph 73, on the 4th Tuesday of the month, he has the right not to appear anywhere. And since today is just that Tuesday, she will ask the servant to bring food to him so that he can dine in his room. She had heard that it was extremely important for wizards to spend time alone, as magic was an important field. His eyes lit up, and he asked if she would tell the general the same thing so he wouldn't get into trouble. Meanwhile, Corin was trying to figure out what was wrong with this girl, deciding that she was just trying to please him. Suddenly, Alicia walked right up to him, causing the man to immediately frown in disbelief. Frowning, the girl noticed the disgusting combination of products, deciding to tell the chef to change the menu. The guy looked at her in surprise, wondering if she really knew what such a choice of products meant. He suddenly froze, whispering to ask if she had been in that place by chance, but Elisha did not understand him. Lost in thought, Corin tried to describe the prison room to her in a veiled manner, but with little success. The girl remembered that shortly before his death, when Jacob was accused of drug trafficking, all the blame was placed on her. Then she spent several days in prison, after which she was bought out, paying a small bail, like for a slave. However, she replied to the guy that she had only heard a little about it, but nothing more. Elisha added that he had already suffered enough, being unfairly imprisoned, so she should take care of it. Corin was surprised that she already knew that he had been imprisoned because of a false accusation by an aristocrat. The girl then suggested that they eat a normal meal, adding that, fortunately, there were many different dishes on the table. After a slight hesitation, Corin decided to ask if the noble lady was afraid of him. These words surprised her very much. There was no fear on her face as she asked if she really should be afraid of her husband's knights. The guy realized that her way of thinking was completely different from other girls, which surprised him. When the table was set with a variety of dishes, Alicia immediately announced that they could begin eating. At the sight of this beauty, Corin immediately began to drool as he loudly thanked the lady for the treats. A little later, as the girl was walking down the corridor, Lapis was heading towards her with books and scrolls in his hands. When the boy saw Alicia, he froze, not knowing how to communicate with her after she had done a good deed for him. She asked if he should send a man to help her, but he asked to voice the 12th point of his contract. The girl replied that no one could touch the wizard's materials until he gave his consent. Having dropped all his things on the floor, the guy immediately asked what point 33 meant, wanting to check her. She replied that it spoke of notifying the wizard 2 days before any significant events in the master's life. Lapis asked in surprise if she had read his entire employment contract, to which she responded in the negative. He looked at the lady with distrust, realizing that she would not have been able to read all this in such a short time. But at that very second, the girl said with a smile that she had learned it, and this statement stunned the wizard. The guy asked with displeasure whether this meant that there was no need to inform the ordinary knights of the order about anything. Elisha replied that she had not been able to inform them of the wedding. They must have heard that it had been arranged in a hurry. Turning around, the wizard asked if she was apologizing to him only because she had not been able to tell him. He immediately remembered when he and Losley were freezing, and he promised to take revenge on the adults who did this to them. Elisha said that she was asking for understanding. Because it was her mistake, she was unable to fulfill one of the conditions of his agreement. She was in no position to invite anyone to the wedding, so she asks him to understand her situation. These words made the boy cry unconsciously, while she looked at him with a good-natured smile. Looking at her, he tried to understand who she was, because literally, from the morning, he did not want to accept her as a mistress. Meanwhile, in another part of the country, a war was raging, where knights fought with various monsters. Lucerne was covered in blood from head to toe, but his gaze was the same as always, warlike. Now he felt at ease, and on his face shone an evil smile, warning his enemies. That same evening, Elisha sat in the living room reading a book by candlelight, enjoying complete solitude. Suddenly, the butler approached her, placing another candle next to her, thereby surprising the mistress of the house. He said that reading books was, of course, useful, but she should take care of her eyes, and she replied that she would take that into account. He then said that he had received information from the front, and it looked like the war would last longer than expected. She already knew about it. Although Lucerne wanted to finish everything in a week, everything would not go according to plan. But because of the wizards who resorted to using stones, the situation became more complicated with the appearance of monsters. Therefore, the war would drag on for another 2 months. But Henri was confident that the general would definitely return soon. But before that, he asked to give her a medicine that was completely harmless to her health, as a dietary supplement. Elisha looked at the bottle and replied that she would take it a week before the general's arrival, next month. Henri was dissatisfied with this answer, as he was sure that the gentleman could return at any moment. The girl interrupted him, saying that it was enough to drink the medicine a week before they went to bed. The man immediately became embarrassed and cleared his throat, not expecting her to know what this medicine was for. Elisha added that it was better to avoid unnecessary rumors now, which caused Henri to apologize and wish her good night. As he walked out the door, he remembered that she had said that she would take the medicine a week before the general returned, after which he began to wonder if this meant that she knew exactly when he would return. But how would she know? Elisha thought she was going to do it herself, but being told so bluntly brought her back to harsh reality. The birth of a child to a couple who signed a contract was absolutely impossible, which promised many problems. It's been a month since she arrived here, but she can't relax for a moment. She has to stay strong. Initially, before Lucerne left, Elisha thought that he was interested only in her body, but it is unknown whether his intentions will remain the same after he returns from the war as a winner. In any case, we need to focus on holding out until this man becomes the leader. Then Elisha will find freedom, and perhaps she will finally have the family she has dreamed of for so long. But for a person whose goal is survival, such dreams are too much of a luxury right now. All she can do is hope that all the terms of the deal will be met, and Lucerne will calmly give her a divorce. Looking out the window, the girl with a confident look firmly declared to herself that it was time to return to reality. Elisha spent the following days going about her daily business, while simultaneously establishing a relationship with Lapis. They managed to become good friends and spent a lot of time together, despite their personal affairs. The mistress of the house also spent a lot of time with other knights, wanting to get to know them as closely as possible. As the time approached for Lucerne's return, Elisha began to take the medicine brought by Henri. There were only a few days left before the arrival, which is why the mansion was in full swing with work, which was managed by Elisha herself. Suddenly, a joyful Henri ran into the room, declaring that the war was over and the gentleman was planning to return tomorrow. It was the last call for the girl, who understood that time was running out and he would soon return. Meanwhile, people celebrated the Empire's victory, saying that the general had cut as many as 500 monsters in half with his sword. Others also happily replied that it would be no problem for him to chop off 20,000 heads. But there were other rumors as well. He was forced to go to war instead of enjoying his honeymoon with his wife. At the same time, in the estate of the Marquis of Fulman, Carol's parents, the girl complained that she was very upset. She cried, declaring that Lucerne had been deceived, and now she was beside herself, worrying about the general. The Marquise replied that they, too, could not believe that Lucerne had married the girl who had recently washed their clothes. The Marquis also calmly added that she was from a fallen family, the name of which now played no role. Suddenly, he angrily declared that if there was a chance to show her his place, he was ready to do everything possible for this. The Marchioness asked what he was saying, since Carol could handle it perfectly well herself, just as she had taught her. At that very moment, the girl smiled, saying that in fact an interesting thought had come into her head. She then stated that she would solve the problem herself, showing everyone that she was not someone who could be treated like that. Radiating an ominous aura, Carol politely asked her father to lend her a few men to do the dirty work. That same evening, Elisha stood in front of the mirror, examining her appearance and preparing to meet her husband. She remembered his words when he asked her to be ready on the night he returned, so that they could finish what they had started. Slowly pulling off her robe, the girl thought that he was just joking then, and just scared her a little. Suddenly, she jumped up. I heard some strange sound, but I didn't understand where exactly it was coming from. Then she noticed the door, which had always been locked before, but was now slightly open. At that very moment, Lucerne came out from behind that door, stunning Alicia with his sudden appearance. The girl was embarrassed and didn't know what to say. The man frowned and asked why she was so surprised. She replied that she had heard that he would return tomorrow, and that the soldiers were supposed to hold a ceremonial parade. Lucerne replied that, as planned, the soldiers would pass through the gates at dawn, and he had things to do. Elisha wondered what urgent matter had forced the general to leave his soldiers and come here so early. The man calmly replied that it was an old promise, but it seemed that she still remembered it very well. The girl immediately understood what was being discussed, which is why she blushed and became embarrassed again, not answering. Unable to bear it any longer, she loudly explained that she was simply getting ready for bed and did not expect him to come today. She then asked why he appeared from there, glancing at the always locked door, which was open. She explained that until now the door had been locked and had never been opened. At that very moment, the man approached her. Then Elisha concluded that his office was there, and only he had the right to visit that room. Suddenly, Lucerne grabbed the girl by the shoulders, after which he gently threw her onto the bed, which she did not expect. He explained that this bedroom used to belong to him, but now it became the bedroom of a married couple. Looking into his eyes, she thought she was afraid of them. They looked as if they were ready to swallow her up in an instant. The girl decided to remind him that he would probably have to go to the gates tomorrow morning and meet the soldiers, which is why she suggested that he go to bed instead of fulfilling that same old promise. However, the man came even closer to her, asking where she was going, and her heart immediately started pounding. Elisha clutched the sheet tightly as the general moved so close she could feel his breath. When they kissed, the girl thought that it deprived her of any ability to think clearly. Suddenly, he lay down on her lap, saying that because of the victory parade, he had no more than 2 hours left to sleep. And even if she is upset, she needs to be patient a little longer, after which he will devote all his time to her. Smiling, the general said that he would soon fulfill his promise, so she did not need to worry about it. Alicia thought he would go all the way. Maybe because she was so surprised, her heart was still pounding. Then she asked if she would be allowed to go outside the mansion, because she did not expect such a ban. Lucerne replied that he thought the war would not end quickly, and that he had not been informed that she had tried to escape. After that, he said that she would be able to go out tomorrow afternoon, and such simplicity surprised the girl. Closing his eyes, the general invited her to eat together, to which he received a surprised but affirmative answer. He added that if she wanted, she could go out at other times, as the ban was no longer in effect. Looking closely at the sleeping man, Elisha concluded that he was indeed a very strange person. The next morning, as the sun illuminated the room, the girl began to slowly awaken from her sleep. Sitting up, she tried to remember when she had managed to fall asleep, and even end up under the covers. She noticed an empty seat next to her, feeling as if everything that had happened had been a dream. After breakfast and getting ready, she headed to the prepared carriage, where the Knights of the Black Lion were already waiting for her. She was asked to be careful because the parade could be very crowded, and there would be no room to move. Alicia apologized to Ian and Nora, but he replied that most people didn't like the palace receptions anyway. The girl said that before she went to where they would eat, she had to stop in somewhere else. It shouldn't take long, and she got permission from the general, so there shouldn't be any problems. After some time, the carriage arrived at a small building, and two men were meeting them near the entrance. After letting Elisha in, they said that the knights would have to wait outside, and they immediately became indignant. Nora refused with a displeased look, explaining that the parade would soon begin, and there would be a lot of people everywhere. Elisha quickly stopped her, saying that everything was fine, promising that she would finish within 10 minutes. Ian reluctantly agreed, but asked her to promise in return that she would never leave the store. Nodding, the girl headed inside Spencer's brokerage company, where she wanted to resolve a couple of her issues. This agency is an expert in the real estate market and conducts dozens of purchase and sale transactions daily. So it's no surprise that they have such tight security, but Lucerne must not know about her purchase. In the office, she was met by a gray-haired man who greeted her politely, asking if she was looking for anything specific. Alicia replied that she was very interested in a piece of land located near the enchanted forest of Ulif. The man was surprised, saying that it would soon be put up for auction, but that was not what the lady would be looking for. She has been there before, and she is interested in buying the place, not in a short-term investment. Lost in thought, the broker showed her documents, where the price of the land was slightly higher than she had expected. The only thing that interested the girl now was that it could help make Lucerne the head of the Cartier family. The man thought that it would be impossible for a simple noble lady to possess such information. Then he rose up, declaring that he would tell her something, but only because she looked like a knowledgeable person. He reported that after the previous owner of the land disappeared, a rumor began to spread that it only brought misfortune. If she wants a country house so badly, he can offer several much better options. Smiling, Elisha replied that she liked this land because the whole city was full of hot springs, and maybe he'll be lucky enough to find one if he digs in that area. The man decided that this lady had no plan at all. Elisha thought that if their conversation ever reached Lucerne's ears, it would be a good excuse. Unable to bring enough arguments, the broker said he would send her detailed information to the address. The girl was about to leave when she suddenly dropped the basket of documents, stopping when she noticed a brochure. The man explained that it was a luxury mansion for single women, and if she was interested, he would send her information. She agreed, because it would be nice to immediately find a place for a quiet life after the divorce from Lucerne. Sometime later, she reached the square where the parade was starting, trying to push her way through the crowd. There were a lot of people, but she was able to get closer. Noticing that the parade was about to begin, horsemen began to pass in front of her, proudly holding pennants in their hands, while others shouted that the general had won. Everyone was shouting praises in his direction, while Lucerne himself was on the balcony, next to some girl. He couldn't see Alicia, who had merged with the crowd that was shouting that he was always standing guard over their empire. The girl looked attentively at her husband, while others asked for Saint Ondine's blessing for him. The general waved to everyone, while the girl wondered if this was really the same man she had seen the night before. If they hadn't agreed to have lunch today, she would have really thought that all this was a dream. Now he is so close, but at the same time there is a huge gap between them, preventing them from meeting. She suddenly started, telling herself that she had imagined that they had just met each other's eyes for a moment. Then she turned around abruptly, deciding that in such a crowd it was simply impossible, which is why she decided to leave. Meanwhile, Ian and Nora were trying to get through to her, shouting that there were a lot of people here and that she needed to go to the back gate. Barely audibly, she replied that she understood everything. After which, having emerged from the crowd, she quickly headed towards the alley. The place was practically deserted. Only two vagabonds were there, not interested in the parade. Walking forward, the girl thought that she had simply entered an alley, but it suddenly became so deserted and quiet. Suddenly, someone crept up to her, covering her mouth with his hands so that she could not scream or call for help. They then dragged her further down the alley, pushing her to the ground, telling each other that she needed to be held down properly. Two guys started to rip her dress, asking if they could really do that since she was an aristocrat. Another answered in the affirmative, adding with a smile that they had been told to ruin her appearance and leave her here. She looked at their faces, when suddenly she felt that their strength began to float and her vision was failing her. When she saw the reaching hands, she thought that the faint smell of nutmeg was being used as a hallucinogen. It seems that these people are not professionals, because they did not teach that it takes time for it to work. She decided that while she was still able to move, she had to run, after which she sharply kicked one of them in the groin. Gathering her remaining strength, Elisha began to run away as fast as she could, while the boys tried to figure out what was going on. The girl thought that if someone were to recognize her now, the general's wife, ridicule would definitely be inevitable. Stopping for a moment, she decided that she needed to come to her senses somewhere secluded and private. Her vision was still blurry, and the drug was starting to take effect more strongly as she crawled out of the alley. Elisha looked up in shock when she heard a familiar voice asking what kind of look she had. The ladies asked to see the general's wife, who decided to arrange a surprise by showing up at their meeting, but Arian said with a smile that this couldn't be. It was probably a courtesan who had run away from her client. Elisha knew that she was finished, because she presented herself in this form in front of Arian, who would not miss it. Suddenly, she felt a very heavy fabric fall onto her shoulders. It was a military uniform. Lucerne asked how she could have slipped out of the room in the middle of the trial, which required a search for her. All the girls were surprised by his appearance, but the most surprised and dissatisfied among them was Arian. Elisha's body went completely numb, leaving her only able to look at him and somehow say his name. Unable to bear it, she fell, but the man immediately caught her, while the ladies surrounding them watched. The general said that the effect had not yet worn off, asking if she had really felt so good that her legs had no strength. She tried to answer something, but the man stopped her, saying that he was also at his limit, and looked around. While the ladies were whispering, he picked up his wife in his arms, offering to return, adding that she would be punished. At that very moment, Arian stopped them, deciding to ask what these two were doing right on the street. She swallowed, taking in the rather open appearance of Elisha as she sat in the general's arms. Lucerne replied that they had intended to dine together, but before they got there, they were overcome with passion. Hearing this, the ladies immediately began to whisper and laugh. After all, they were newlyweds. What can you say? Wanting to hurry, the man said that they still had unfinished business, so they would leave them. Lying on his shoulders, Elisha thought that, thanks to Lucerne, she had managed to escape danger from Orion. But it seems that she will never pay for the rest of her life for the fact that such an important person was pulled out of the parade. Elisha could hardly speak, but she tried to ask how he knew, and how he was able to find her. With a serious face, the man asked in response whether she thought the mark on her neck was just a decorative element. The knights informed him of her disappearance, but it was quite problematic to come immediately because of the parade. Now they are in the hotel where they were going to meet her. The surprised employees began to whisper. He then asked what had happened, and Elisha replied in a barely audible voice that she had been suddenly attacked by two vagabonds. She herself thought that Lucerne had decided to leave right in the middle of the event just to find her. She also told him that she smelled nutmeg and cloves while she was wondering why he did it. The general concluded that it was a paralytic agent and waved his hand, calling the worker over. Then he asked her not to say anything more, since her tongue must already be very stiff. Elisha almost fainted, thinking that he was worried about her, but that simply couldn't be true. A few hours later, she woke up from her sleep and sat up to see Lucerne with a tray in his hands. He offered her to drink cocoa with alcohol. This should help her come to her senses in the shortest possible time. The man watched as his wife slowly took sips, but her body still barely obeyed. Then he turned his gaze to the door, through which Ian and Nora flew in, worried, addressing the lady. At that very moment, the general released his shadows, which immediately attacked the knights, painfully knocking them off their feet. The man became angry, asking them to try to find an excuse for themselves, because something like this was unacceptable. The knights immediately began to apologize, adding that they would humbly accept any punishment for this terrible mistake. Elisha said that in that situation, no one could have imagined that everything would turn out this way, and only she was to blame. Lucerne shouted that it was not up to her to decide who would bear responsibility, but seeing her trembling, he immediately fell silent. Clutching his face, the dissatisfied general asked if the attackers looked like vagabonds. If those people are connected to Jacob or Marco, they must be dead already, and we need to find them. He ordered to search for the corpses of people who had no relatives. The knights understood the order and left. Lucerne sat down on the bed next to Elisha, touching her and asking how she was feeling. Her appearance left much to be desired, but she replied that it became a little easier to move her tongue, but it was as if weights were still tied to her arms and legs. But she didn't have time to finish speaking, feeling a kiss. After a few seconds, the man moved away, smiling and saying that it was very sweet. Elisha was embarrassed when the general said that he would help her arms and legs get rid of the numbness very quickly. The girl immediately understood the hint, while Lucerne was saying that if her body warmed up, her feelings would return. Kissing her, he added that the closer you get to the center of the body, the faster the feelings awaken. Looming over her, Lucerne said that by now, rumors would probably be spreading everywhere. Everyone was saying that they had secluded themselves here to enjoy each other, so they couldn't leave. Elisha agreed. If it was necessary to get rid of the paralysis, Lucerne began to undress. Hanging over the embarrassed girl, the man said with a smile that he had been patient for 2 whole months and had been waiting for this. With a trembling hand, she touched his body, after which the general asked her to look him straight in the eyes. Elisha remembered Jacob in her past life, asking how they dared invite this bastard here. Sitting at the family table, he angrily added that Lucerne was a member of the imperial family and was targeting their lineage. The head replied that they were all the same, that he was the one insulting the family, and that Marco was the one conspiring with the temple. The general asked with a smile if they wanted them all to repent together, now, after so many years, after which a verbal altercation began. But at that moment, Marco was touching Elisha's leg under the table. She suddenly started and looked up when she noticed Lucerne's gaze on her. Turning away, the girl thought sadly that this man had just noticed her in this form. The chief gave Lucerne a final warning, adding that he would not be so merciful in the future. The smile disappeared from the general's face, after which he slowly stood up, clutching the bottle of wine tightly in his hand. Pouring wine on Marco's head, he said he had no business being in a family that displayed such behavior. He had fun with the hired killers he sent to him, and then asked them to wait for a return gift. Without thinking twice, the man headed towards the exit, while the whole family, including Elisha, silently watched him go. Carol said she saw it all, asking how such a man could even exist, and she wanted him. Then she told Elisha that she had an important job for her, because she had to do everything for her. After this, the girl opened her eyes, realizing that she had fallen asleep, after which she noticed Lucerne next to her. He touched her cheek, asking if she had a nightmare, and at first she thought she was still sleeping. She thought that both in that dream about the past and now, this man saved her, spitting on his reputation. Elisha didn't know if it would be a mistake to assume that he was treating her with tenderness or was just playing a role. She lowered her head onto his hand, deciding that it frightened her, while the man watched her closely. Then he said with a smile on his face that it was hard for her, so he held back and stopped at one time. But if she keeps looking at him like that, he'll have no choice but to continue. Sometime later, they went down to the first floor of the hotel, and the eyes of the others were riveted on them. They both froze, as Elisha thought that they had ended up staying in bed together until the morning. Although the effects of the substance had long since worn off by that time, Lucerne was still full of strength and energy. Looking at her husband, she thought that he seemed completely unconcerned with the views of other people. Suddenly, Lucerne was called out by a young, fair-haired girl in a snow-white dress uniform with a cloak on her back. I immediately recognized Alicia as the only princess of the empire, Ilione, and the most influential figure. She approached the general and asked with a smile what had happened yesterday, since she and her mother had been waiting for him so much. She is now a serviceman in the active army and the main representative of the imperial family. When Ilione looked at her, Alicia curtsied, greeted the princess, and stated his name. However, behind her smile, she was worried, because this girl was the one who would propose to Lucerne in 5 years. Although the proposal was made for political purposes, their relationship is such that there could have been other reasons. The princess told him that if he missed this meeting, his father would certainly be angry and displeased. The general replied without much enthusiasm that she would try not to be late, but could not promise anything. Smiling awkwardly, Ilione said she was sorry, because yesterday she had hoped that Lucerne would introduce his wife. Alicia realized that if she was talking about yesterday, then she was probably talking about the dinner to which Lucerne had invited her. He asked her to be sure to come to his palace, because he wanted to talk to her without rushing anywhere. Now she realized that he was not going to eat with her, but to introduce her to the princess without warning her in advance. Some time later, the carriage with Lucerne went straight to the royal palace for a personal meeting. The maid who was in Elisha's room said that the master immediately left for a meeting at the palace. If he had already gone there, he would not return for several days, which upset the girl a little. Lying in bed, she thought about what was happening to her lately and what was happening to her feelings. She decided that it was because of Lucerne's image, which was so different from what she had seen in her past life. Although at the same time, they did not meet in person very often, but even these meetings created a certain image. She learned all the information about him, mainly from the terrible rumors that literally followed him on his heels. Compared to all these rumors, he is much gentle and caring. But at that very second, the girl covered her mouth. Then she began to turn her head, trying to drive away these thoughts, because she had never thought about such things before. Suddenly, Elisha noticed with surprise two maids talking anxiously. She immediately became interested in what had happened. Since Sophie had such a serious face, apparently something serious had happened. Without wasting any time, she got out of bed, asking what happened. The maids immediately turned their attention to her. Meanwhile, in the next room, the maids unsuccessfully escorted people out, while the knights tried to restrain Nora. Ian and Corinne held the girl tightly, demanding that she stop. But she didn't even think about giving in. She cried out loudly that she had failed to fulfill her knightly duty, which had put her mistress in danger. At that very second, the girl froze when she heard Elisha's voice, and she asked her with a serious face what she was doing. Nora immediately relaxed, after which the two knights immediately released her, hoping that she would not break down again. After a couple of seconds, everyone decided to leave the room, leaving the lady alone with the knight for a private conversation. Elisha said that a knight's life belonged to his master, but she decided not to take responsibility for it. Instead, she chose to run away, which is completely out of character, or maybe it's her way of taking responsibility. Suddenly, Elisha handed her a napkin on which lay a bracelet of flowers, which she immediately recognized. The girl asked if she remembered the dried pansies that everyone in the monastery received when they took the oath. This thing surprised Nora, who couldn't even find the words to ask how she knew about it. Elisha said she knew she grew up in a monastery, and she too, in the monastery of Archbishop Rosary. Although immediately after leaving there, she ended up in the hands of Cartier, and she became a knight, which is why they did not meet. She added that a person who truly shines in his place is like a light shining from afar. And for her, she is exactly that kind of person, so she must promise that she will not do anything like that again. Nora immediately fell on one knee before her, solemnly declaring that she would lay down her life to protect her. Meanwhile, at the royal palace, Ilione told Lucerne that she understood today why he took the day off, after which, with a hint of malice in her voice, she declared that his wife was a real beauty, with whom it wouldn't be a sin to spend time. The man frowned, saying that he had not given her permission to call him by his name, which surprised her. Even though she has been calling him that since childhood, now he has a wife, and so she needs to refrain from doing that. Poking him in the shoulder, the princess asked why he was so cruel, and this despite their strong and friendly relationship. However, she immediately fell silent when she noticed his displeased and burning gaze, deciding not to continue. After clearing her throat, she declared that she understood everything and would now call him General, regardless of time and place. Walking further forward, Lucerne calmly asked how she knew he had booked a hotel yesterday. Ilione replied that he never introduced his wife, so she became curious, and then apologized. And then she looked at him, thinking that she had known him for a very long time, and they were quite close in a friendly way. However, sometimes something flashes through him that makes her involuntarily cringe, but she has never seen him smile. Quickening her pace and keeping her hands behind her back, the princess decided to ask what kind of person his wife was and why he chose her. She hoped that he did not treat Elisha the same way as she did, because noble ladies were quite sensitive. Lucerne replied that she had only the manners of a noble lady, although she was extremely cautious, but unbending. And she also has hundreds of different thoughts in her head that he doesn't even know about. She's a very interesting girl. Suddenly turning around, the princess looked at his face in shock, seeing the general smile for the first time with her own eyes. 3 days later, the aristocrats were whispering that the general had received the fief and the Noren forest as trophies after the war. Before this, he did not have a noble title, and everything went to the country. It seems that it was not in vain that he got married and received a title. They say his wife did not show up for the receptions because she was feeling unwell, but that is very hard to believe. Everyone decided that this was a contract marriage. Although 3 days ago, Baroness Aden personally saw the general and his wife at the hotel. Lucerne, who was present at the reception, listening in on their conversations, decided that he was tired of it all. But there was still a matter that needed to be sorted out. He also remembered Elisha and her condition after what had happened. Suddenly, an image of his wife appeared in his head, lying in bed and gently clinging to his hand. The general immediately shuddered as he realized with surprise that he was now thinking about her without any reason. Then he rose from his seat, deciding that this was enough to please the emperor, and now it was time to return. At that very moment, Ian stood in his way, immediately approached him, and began to whisper information to him. He then bowed low, adding that it seemed they wanted to see how he would react to the insult. Lucerne clenched his fists, asking if they were interested in whether he would throw out his defiled wife or not. The man headed for the exit, concluding that he would have to delay his return home a little for the sake of business. Looking at Marquis Fulman, who was enjoying himself with the guests, the general ordered the knight to prepare everything. The Marquis is one of those people who tremble over the secrecy of his personal life and is very afraid of his wealthy wife, because it was thanks to her blood ties to the royal family that he was able to re-establish his lineage. To be honest, he was actually afraid of losing her money and was currently chained to a chair. When he came to, he was horrified to see Lucerne sitting in front of him, calmly smoking a cigarette. After taking a drag, the general turned to him and said that he seemed to have a very bad hobby, a gambling house. Just an hour ago, the Marquis was sitting surrounded by 2 girls, saying that he was incredibly lucky today. Suddenly, a worker came out to him, telling the dear client that he had already managed to win 3 games in a row. Ian came up to me in a dealer's uniform and said with a smile that he even took the girls with him and had a lot of fun. The Marquis was shocked and could not believe his eyes as he introduced himself as a knight from the Order of the Black Lion. Fulman asked how he dared to do this, since he was an aristocrat of the empire, and this was just a gambling house. At that very moment, a bag containing various instruments fell in front of the prisoner's feet. He was immediately overcome with fear, after which he began to shout to the general that there had clearly been some kind of misunderstanding. Lucerne approached him, asking if he thought he would get away with it after touching his wife. The general also asked more angrily whether he should not have been prepared for this, since everything in this world has to be paid for. Ian asked him not to worry, because when it was all over, the best wizards of the empire would erase his memory. He will open his eyes already in the hotel, in a state of intoxication, with traces of sexual intercourse, and not remembering anything. Taking a hammer in his hand, Lucerne told the Marquis that his wife would be so upset when she found out about her husband's infidelity. The next morning, Lapis walked down the corridor where he had taught the Marquis a lesson the day before, when he decided to attack his mistress. If only he had not been ordered to remain silent, he would have certainly bragged to her about his deed. Suddenly, he noticed a maid who was standing a step away from Elisha's chambers and was about to go inside. He asked Sophie what it was, and she replied with a smile that it was today's newspaper and that she was going to take it to the lady. Hearing this, the wizard's face began to slowly change, after which his eyes burned with determination to do so. The maid couldn't stop admiring such a sweet face. I understand why Lapis is trying so hard to charm her. She asked him to pass it on to her instead, after which the guy practically ran into Elisha's room. The girl politely invited him inside, asking with a smile on her face if he would like a cup of tea. Instead of a direct answer, the guy announced that he had brought a newspaper, but as soon as he saw the headline, he immediately froze. The wizard abruptly hid the newspaper behind his back, while the surprised Elisha asked if something had happened. Lapis became nervous, not knowing what to answer, when suddenly he heard a question about whether they had written anything interesting in the newspaper. The front page featured a photo of Lucerne and Ilione, and Lapis didn't understand why that particular article had appeared. At the same time, a carriage arrived at the mansion, from which a general emerged, who was immediately greeted by the servants. At the same time, Lapis distracted Elisha and led him to the table, loudly declaring that he wanted to eat the apple right now. Throwing aside the crumpled newspaper, he added that he had been dying to eat it long before he came here. Elisha replied that she should tell the maid, but a few minutes later she personally peeled the apple for him. And now he suddenly eats apples cut personally by the lady, but all the newspapers in the mansion will have to be burned. Elisha said she heard that there was an article about the princess and Lucerne on the front page of today's newspaper. This shocked the wizard. Then he looked at the smiling girl, who asked if he wanted more. Meanwhile, Henri said he was surprised when he returned at night without warning a few days ago, and he left at dawn, so he was worried that he didn't even get a proper rest from the journey. Lucerne replied that nothing was expected to happen anytime soon, so he shouldn't be so busy. Looking at the office, he said he felt a strong discrepancy with what he had seen there last time. The butler replied that a lot had changed in the 2 months he had been away, and they had done a general cleaning, all thanks to the lady, planning the placement of items in the house and organizing the storage of expensive things, increasing the efficiency of servants, raising people's desire to work. She did all this single-handedly. The general listened to this with an indifferent expression on his face, only answering that these were significant changes. The man then turned around, hearing one of the maids asking how she could not give it to him. Looking into those eyes, Sophie added with a smile that the lady should definitely know how much Mr. Lapis loved her. By clearing his throat, the general attracted attention to himself, which immediately made the maids nervous and bowed low. At that very moment, a joyful Corin came in with food in his hands and asked the butler where the lady was now. He wanted to say that he brought a lot of food, but when he saw Lucerne's displeased look, he immediately fell silent and froze. The two maids and the knight were embarrassed under the languid gaze of the gentleman, who had remained silent the entire time. He then said that everyone was so eager to meet his dear wife, whom he himself had not even seen yet. He asked the butler about this, who shuddered, answering that the lady was a very kind and caring person. These words brought a smile to the face of the general, who repeated the butler's comment with a hint of irony. The man explained that she had independently resolved the servant's difficulties and even dealt with the food problem. Lucerne frowned, thinking that she was only being so cautious towards him, which could not be said about the others. Corinne and the maid looked at Henri, while he watched the gentleman, who sighed heavily, covering his face with his hand. The man then turned his head towards him, saying that he needed to see his wife, and then asked where she was now. At this time, Lapis asked if the content of this article upset her. Elisha did not know what to answer. She knew that the general and the princess were not in such a relationship. She was absolutely sure of it. Besides, even if there is something between them, she still can't do anything about it, no matter how much she wants to. Hearing such speeches, the wizard immediately asked if he should teach the general a lesson, which brought a smile to the girl's face. At this time, standing behind the open door, Lucerne listened attentively to their friendly and carefree dialogue. Suddenly, the smile disappeared from Elisha's face when she noticed her husband enter the room without warning. He frowned, stating that it seemed like he had interrupted their friendly and carefree time. Then he approached the upset Lapis, asking him to go away from here and not bother the lady of this house. The dissatisfied guy took the plate, replying that the lady had never said that he was annoying her with his presence. However, seeing the general's displeased look, he immediately headed for the exit. The man asked to leave the plate. A few seconds later, Lucerne sat down on the sofa, after which he stared at the plate with the peeled apple. Elisha swallowed, trying to figure out why he looked like he was in a bad mood right now. Looking at his expression and behavior, The girl realized that she could not understand his intentions at all. When she decided to clear the plate, Lucerne immediately asked her why she never peeled his apples for him. Elisha replied that if he wanted apples, then she would call Sophie. Suddenly his gaze went to the newspaper. Taking it in his hands, the man replied that he wanted to eat something peeled by her hands, be it an apple or a peach. Then he smiled slyly and asked if, since that was the case, she could feed him right in bed. This proposal confused the girl, who replied that he had come home after so much time and had immediately started his own business. He grabbed her hand, saying that he thought she had just bewitched him, but it turned out that was not the case. They then clasped their hands, as the general said that it seemed like everyone in the house was in love with her. Alicia did not resist, but tried to understand what he was talking about and when she had ever cast a spell on someone. Kissing her hand, Lucerne reminded her that she had undressed on the first day of their meeting and had sneaked into his room at night. She even somehow managed to drag him down the aisle, and this despite the fact that he never intended to get married. He then asked her to look into his eyes, after which he embraced the embarrassed girl in a tender kiss. Without wasting any time, he asked her to take off her clothes, as he wanted to look at her after so much time. She thought he had had a good time with the princess in the palace, and now wanted to satisfy his needs. Of course, nothing could be done, since she was his wife by contract. But now the girl sensed injustice, which caused Elisha to frown, replying that she didn't want to undress alone because it was too embarrassing. The man smiled, then quickly pulled his shirt off, asking if she was happy now. The girl became even more embarrassed when she saw the general's half-naked body, and then she noticed something. On the left side of his chest, she found a scar, after which she asked what it was. Lucerne replied that he received it in the temple. He explained that, as a child, he lived in the temple under the guidance of his uncle Merk, as a result of which he received it. Alicia looked at him incredulously, wondering why he lived there, but was able to get such a serious wound. The general replied that if an orphan living there did something bad, he would be whipped as punishment. Elisha decided to ask if he was a bad child. Lucerne replied that, by their standards, apparently he was. He then suggested that they end the conversation, after which he abruptly pushed the girl onto the bed, hanging over her. Leaning over, the man said he could no longer hold back, but her body was too weak to hurry. Doing it slowly would not be easy. At this time, Elisha felt strange, but at the same time, good. As the evening approached, they lay in bed, completely tired from spending time together. Elisha did not sleep, noticing that it was already night, which meant that they had been making love all day. Suddenly, Lucerne hugged her, asking if she was awake. She replied that she couldn't even move properly. The man asked her to get up, wash herself, and put on something nice, as he wanted to eat outside. He reminded them that they had not managed to do this last time, and now was the perfect time. The girl blushed and was surprised, not understanding why he decided to eat so late, and even outside the mansion. Some time later, they reached a restaurant, where the visitors, noticing them, began to whisper. The waiter greeted them, while Elisha noticed that all eyes were on Lucerne. Looking at him, she couldn't understand whether it was because she was beautiful or there was some other reason. But when he said he would grow old while they waited for a place here, she realized it was all because of his bad reputation. When they took a free table, the general politely pulled out her chair, showing his wife his manners. Lucerne noticed Elisha's wandering gaze, causing him to frown and ask curiously if she was looking for something. The girl replied that the offer came so unexpectedly, so she thought that he wanted to introduce her to someone. The first thing she thought of was the princess, but the general, pouring wine, did not understand what she was talking about. He said with a smile that he was having dinner with his wife, and that there was no need for any unnecessary introductions now. Elisha was pleasantly surprised by this answer, but she had mixed feelings about him, calling her his wife. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by a man running out from behind the far door, practically naked. He screamed hysterically that it was a man dressed as a girl, and that he had attacked him some time ago. It was the Marquis of Fulman, who was covered from head to toe in bruises and lipstick marks from kisses. The girls who noticed this sight began to ask each other if this was not a staircase leading to the hotel. Another one suggested taking a look at him. He looked like he had just been caught cheating on his wife. Elisha was shocked to recognize the man as Carol's father, but he didn't look very good. Fullman grabbed the worker by the leg and asked him to hide him, but he was told that a customer should not behave like that. He then grabbed the man and led him deeper into the room while he struggled furiously and screamed that he was looking for him. Looking at this, Alicia tried to understand why the Count, who was known for his excellent relationship with his wife, looked like this. Meanwhile, Lucerne, who was leisurely enjoying his wine, said with a smile that it was an interesting spectacle. Elisha remembered how in her past life, one of the maids hit her on Carol's orders for another mistake. The aristocrat said with a smile that not long ago, her mother had asked a famous fortune teller for a prediction. Then she asked if she knew what she had told her, and replied that some sinister person had attached himself to Jacob. Carol thought about it in a demonstrative and feigned manner, adding that this bitch also steals absolutely all her men. She became curious about who this girl was that was constantly hanging around him. Alicia immediately understood what she was getting at. Now the girl was sitting in a restaurant and drinking wine, but memories still involuntarily crept into her head. She also recalled being pulled into a storage room by several men, loudly mocking her. Among them was Count Fullman, who asked how she dared to stretch out her hands to his daughter's man. Because of her, Carol is now sad and crying bitterly, even though Elisha didn't do it. But no one will believe her anyway. All sorts of things happened to her, but it is these memories that show the very relationship the Fullman family had with her. Their entire family was filled with an unshakable conviction that she was desperate to get Carol's man. However, now she thought that some unpleasant situation must have served as a reason. Lucerne asked with interest what she was thinking about so deeply. The girl shuddered, answering that it was about nothing. After returning, her memories seem incomplete. She remembers most of the events, but not completely. The general smiled, saying that she was still looking in that direction, which meant that she was interested in the situation. Then he decided to ask if she felt sorry for him. Alicia was surprised, because she did not expect him to ask such a question. In response, the girl asked who he was so that she could feel sorry for him, and he replied that he was the Marquis of Fullman, Carol's father. Alicia immediately frowned, looking closely at her husband, deciding that he was probing her right now. Then she asked herself, it couldn't be that this incident with the Marquis was the work of Lucerne himself. The girl replied that Carol apparently took after her father, after which they continued to have dinner, discussing the food. After the restaurant, when they got into the carriage, Lucerne decided to ask where she could find cooks for the mansion. She replied with a smile that she had first decided to make inquiries at the best inn in the area. As a result, it turned out that previously only army cooks were responsible for cooking in his house. So she decided to bring them back in and put them under the command of the head chef, and this did not contradict the regulations. The man said he wasn't particularly worried about it, but he was curious how she came to that decision. He asked if Archbishop Rosary had helped her. Alicia replied that she had never given her ready answers. Instead, she taught her one method: to choose the right people and place to ask her questions. I asked her about keeping a trade book and how she decided on a supplier, and she replied that she studied at a monastery. As for the supply of products, she simply renegotiated with existing suppliers. The general moved sharply towards her, asking since when she had been so smart, at first assuming that since birth. Alicia replied that as a child she had no money at all, because her father did not pay for her stay in the monastery, and in order to survive, she needed the means of subsistence, without which it would have been very difficult. Therefore, every time she visited the nearest village, she carefully looked around the market. This is how she learned that branded goods sell for more than others, after which she began to create a trademark. All this was done for the benefit of the temple. In this way, Alicia wanted to thank them for providing her with housing. Elisha even showed how to best promote alcohol by saying that it was made by monks from Morning Dew. Thus, the price of its sale almost doubled, and Miss Rosaria took her on as her apprentice. Suddenly, Lucerne pulled Elisha towards him, smiling and asking whether he had taken possession of her or whether she had pulled him towards her. Her story gets more and more soul-stirring with every word she says, but that only makes her more suspicious. If she was so smart already at 14, then she must have lived more than one life. Elisha replied that there are people like Lapis in the world. At 14 years old, he is already the second most powerful wizard in the empire. Then she looked deep into his eyes, that she would definitely be able to cope well with the role of his wife. And if she has the appropriate awards, she will try even harder. Lucerne replied that this was impressive. Then the general touched her cheek, saying that he would call the jeweler, and she could buy whatever she wanted. The girl replied that she didn't need jewelry, and besides, she wasn't planning on going out in public anytime soon. Although if you think about it, after the divorce, they would probably come in handy. But now it is much more important to make Lucerne the head. The man asked if she hadn't spoken of a reward, and Alicia replied that she would have preferred travel to Jules. She added that the nearby hot springs would be enough, but if he was busy, she could go alone. The general thought for a moment, then said that since we were talking about the nearest hot springs, it was definitely Eulif. After which he agreed to go, which made his wife happy, and then asked with a smile if she was happy about it. The girl responded with a smile, giving an affirmative answer, and adding that she really wanted to go there. Once they had decided this issue, there was silence during which they simply enjoyed each other's embrace. The next day, the servants prepared the carriage, saying that the two of them were going on a honeymoon to Julif. They could hardly believe that their master was going on a honeymoon, which was so unlike him. Elisha slapped the notepad, telling Henri that this was a sample menu for the soldiers during their absence. She also wrote down the ingredients needed and their approximate cost to make it easier for them. Lucerne asked whether every wife spent the whole night with a trading book and parted with it before going on a trip with her husband. The girl replied that this was natural, since they could not take care of the management of the mansion once they left. At that very moment, a familiar voice called out to her, and she turned around, noticing the embarrassed Lapis and Laszlo. She asked if something had happened. Laszlo replied that he had heard that Lapis had caused her a lot of inconvenience. Alicia smiled, thinking that Laszlo was, it turns out, much older than his brother, which was quite surprising. The guy continued, saying that they had prepared a small gift for her trip, after which he nudged his brother. Lapis handed her a thin bracelet with a small bell, saying that there was nothing special about it. The girl happily accepted the gift, replying that it was a very lovely bracelet, after which she thanked them. The twins said that if there was dark magic or evil energy nearby, the bell on it would ring. Elisha said that this was the first time she had received such a wonderful gift, and that she would definitely wear it all the time. After this, the twins bowed, wishing their mistress a good trip, and then quickly left. Suddenly, Lucerne put his arm around her, asking if she was saying that this was the first time she had received such a wonderful gift. Embarrassed, she replied that she said it because she was grateful and could not do otherwise to them. The man said that he had to entertain her properly on the trip, so that she would never say that again. When they arrived at the hotel, Elisha was amazed by the beauty of the room, but Lucerne was disappointed. However, he said that it is the most luxurious hotel in Yulhifa, which is ideal for a honeymoon. The girl repeated her husband's last words, causing her heart to immediately pound wildly from the realization of the situation. At that very moment, the manager approached them, greeted them, and added that it was a great honor for him. He then decided to invite them to the reception today, but the general responded with an indifferent and sharp refusal. This upset the manager, but Elisha intervened in the conversation, smiling and saying that they would definitely come. The man's mood immediately changed, after which he bowed low, thanking the lady for her answer. Lucerne asked why she should go there, if she had no desire to, and she replied that it would bring benefits. After all, here you can establish connections with people who are difficult to meet in everyday life. Putting his arm around his wife's shoulders, the man said that all he wanted was to spend days in bed with her. Alicia frowned, thinking that this was exactly what she was afraid of, so she should take matters into her own hands as soon as possible. Turning around abruptly, she said that there wasn't much time left before the appointment, so they needed to get ready. A couple of hours later, they were in the hall. Elisha noticed that there were a lot of noble people there. Lucerne explained that it was high season, and the girl asked how he planned to introduce her to people. Looking at her, the man replied that he would introduce her as his wife, because there were simply no other options. Elisha thought that many people must be hoping that Lucerne would have a relationship with the princess. The general seemed to sense what his wife was thinking, after which he grabbed her hand, deciding to calm her down a little. He said he met the princess only once, and that was on the day the article was published, and their portrait was just fiction. Elisha didn't quite believe it, and the general said that it seemed to him that such things didn't bother her at all. The girl replied that this was not true, but since he had told her this now, it meant that this was indeed the case. The man said that she was so wonderfully meek, and the girl herself frowned, feeling people's eyes on her. They hardly say anything good about them, and gossip about the general marrying a beggar for the sake of status. But it doesn't matter, you can't lose heart, because for this evening she even prepared the dress herself. Suddenly, two men approached them, greeting the general, adding that they had not seen each other for a long time. After congratulating him on his victory, they noticed the girl next to him, saying that she was as beautiful as they had heard. Elisha thanked them for the compliment, saying that they probably had a lot to talk about, so she would leave them. One of the men said that she had a flair to match her beauty, after which the three of them watched her. Taking the glass in her hands, Elisha thought that the general was having no easier time at this reception than his wife. At that very moment, two girls approached her, recognizing her, and then greeted her with a smile at the evening. She decided to be reciprocal, showing etiquette. One of the girls said that it was nice to meet her in such a place. She lowered her head and heard a question asking if she had heard about the Marquis of Fulman and the mess he had gotten himself into. They say he was caught in an inappropriate state. The Marquise even fell ill when she found out about it, but they were interested in Elisha's opinion. The Cartiers are known for their bad relationships within the family, so these people decided that she would say nasty things. She decided to answer neutrally, saying that she was not particularly familiar with what was happening in the capital's high society. What was more important to her was whether there were any interesting events planned here in the near future. The girl with a fan in her hands replied that if we talk about events, then the temple festival will take place soon. At the last festival, a bone fragment of the prophet Listramp was sold, causing the price of their land to rise. The relics of seers and saints are said to bestow blessings, and it seemed that this was the case. Her friend added that even after dying they help people. It was truly a great nobility. Putting the glass on the table, Elisha mentally clarified that they were selling bone fragments of saints for a lot of money. But they do not disclose where the funds actually go, and whether this is truly noble. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out to the girl. Turning around, she looked at the man with surprise and fear. It was Marco with his eternal sly smile, who immediately recognized Elisha, which is why he couldn't pass by. Meanwhile, one of Lucerne's interlocutors asked him to pay attention to the girl with a fan behind him. He explained that she seduces and takes away a new man every night, and it seems that today her target is him. Suddenly, the girl hugged him by the hand, saying that lately he and his wife had been enjoying harmony. The life of a newlywed is undoubtedly good in many ways, but it may teach him something more interesting. After her words, the general abruptly pulled his hand out of her embrace, casting an angry and displeased look at her. The girl said that his wife was undoubtedly very beautiful, but she didn't even wear new dresses. She had previously noticed that the edge of her hem had been treated in a way that had been popular for several years. And if she is going to mend an old dress, then let her do it perfectly. Otherwise, she risks becoming the object of gossip. Lucerne did not respond to this, since he did not know the details of who worked on Elisha's dress and how. Meanwhile, Marco was saying that the girl who had recently been Jacob's servant was now Lady Elisha. He added that the world had improved greatly, and the girl calmly replied that she didn't think he remembered her name. Then she turned around abruptly, saying that she simply had nothing to say to him, so she had to take her leave. Grabbing her hand, the man said with displeasure that it would be better for her to be obedient and quietly follow him. Coming out onto the balcony, he said that she was absolutely glued to Lucerne, doing all sorts of things with him. Marco added that Lucerne would never be the leader, so why not think about choosing the right side? Instead of being content with being a bastard's wife, it would be better to become the next chapter's mistress. Alicia was stunned by his words and offer, deciding that this man was now trying to seduce her. She remembered that even in his past life, he had felt some strange desire and attraction towards her. She lowered her head and smiled, firmly deciding that she was not as pliable as she had been before. The girl decided to go on the attack, asking if this means that Mr. Marco is the next head of the Cartier family. And when she meets the head, she can ask about this, whether Marco will really lead the family in the next generation. Clenching his hands tightly into fists, the man immediately insulted her, asking if she dared to mock him now. Lucerne said that his wife was not one to make fun of others. Rather, he was the one who said something interesting. Then the general asked him to repeat what he had said there, and noticing him, Marco immediately shuddered and was taken aback. Frightened by his appearance, his smug look turned into fear, after which he declared that he had said nothing. Reaching out his hand and releasing his shadow, Lucerne said with a smile that he had a very short memory. The general decided to quote Uncle Merk, saying that if a person is stupid, then it is worth hammering knowledge into his head. After a couple of seconds, he let go, and Marco wanted to say something, but Lucerne asked him not to overdo it. Then he called Elisha to him, and she asked if everything would be all right if this news reached the leader. The man smiled, asking if the boy would say that he was abused by a bastard using dark magic. Then he asked the girl not to worry, explaining that Marco would never mention this for the sake of pride. When they returned to the banquet hall, Elisha again felt that everyone's eyes were on them. Lucerne explained that they consider them perverts and gossip that they are ready to do it anywhere. While she was not around, several people even managed to approach him with very immoral proposals. Apparently, they thought that since he was not restrained in his natural desire, it would be easy to agree to their company. But, as it turned out, one such bug managed to stick to her, and it was the nastiest of them all. Then he touched her cheek, asking, if it came to that, if they shouldn't live up to everyone's expectations, so that none of these flies would dare to come near her in the future, after which the man gave her a tender kiss. When they arrived at the room, Lucerne asked if she had new clothes, but she replied that she had altered the dresses in the mansion. The general immediately realized why the clothing expenses seemed too low, and asked her not to do it again. At first, Elisha didn't understand what he was talking about, and decided to clarify. The man pointed to her dress, hinting at her work. No one will praise her for something like that, and it is better to use his money for its intended purpose and raise her reputation. The girl was upset because she thought that she had sewn everything well, having worked on this dress for several hours. She wanted to do it in the style of her mother's dress, which she saw as a child and admired for a long time. Elisha agreed to go shopping tomorrow. Lucerne called her a very obedient wife. Memories of her past life immediately came to her mind when she heard herself called poor. The head of the family said that she was very smart, and if it weren't for this scar, she would have lived peacefully. He wanted to take care of her, but the poor thing is weak at heart, and it seems she will have to return to Jacob. Lucerne told his grandfather that once she got involved with their family, the path to a peaceful life was closed to her. When asked if he felt sorry for her, he replied that it would be impolite in relation to the life he led. It's just that this girl named Elisha seemed very beautiful and pretty to him in a green dress. Elisha thought that Lucerne gave the impression of a man who was ready to play with any girl. And anyway, she never wore anything green, as we each realized. She was talking about her mother's dress. A little later, Elisha apologized to Nora. But what a knight like her, presented to accompany her. Although this matter was merely a matter of shopping, the knight was determined to carry out the order. With a confident look, she thought that there was no way she could miss such a chance to win the lady's favor. She remembered Lapis saying that he was the only member of the order whom the lady personally treated to tea. Then, Nora decided that she definitely needed to create memories with her mistress that were no less than Lapis. Whatever Elisha buys, she will definitely say that it is beautiful and looks great on her. They approached Spencer's brokerage firm, after which the lady asked if they could come in for a while. The knight asked if this was the same real estate agency she had visited in the capital not long ago. Elisha replied that yesterday at the reception, she heard that all the wives of aristocrats here have villas or a hotel ticket. So she thought that in order to maintain conversations with them, she would need to learn their habits and behavior. Nora realized that the aristocrats also had a lot to learn, and their mistress had a very difficult time. After that, she opened the door for her with a smile, inviting her inside. Elisha thanked her politely, walking forward. Suddenly they froze. I heard someone shouting that he was ready to pay them any amount for this matter. Elisha noticed Arian, who said that she needed this land, so she asked to be her representative. And if it comes to an auction, she must be confident that she will receive a tangible advantage from it. The guy replied that representation at the auction was illegal, but she knew that he was an expert in this field. He must use whatever he can, and be careful to ensure that her name is not revealed. After closing the door, Elisha explained to Nora that it was Marco's wife, Aryan, who was having a very interesting conversation. Then she decided to hide around the corner to watch the moment when the girl would go outside. Peeking around the corner, they saw Aryan, who had pulled her hat down on her head so that no one would recognize her. When she left, Alicia put her hand in her pocket and then turned to Nora, saying that she had a favor to ask of her. Taking out several gold coins, she asked to come inside and find out what kind of land Aryan wanted to get so much. Rumor has it that Carol and Aryan are not as simple as they seem, so you need to keep a close eye on them. Now, she is sort of an advisor to her husband, so she should get some useful information for him. Nora thought she was doing enough, but it turned out she was worried about things like that too. Bowing, the knight loyally declared that he would try to find out everything and return with information. When the girl went inside, Alicia remained outside, wondering what Aryan needed so urgently. Towards evening, the girl told the coachman that they would return quickly, so she asked him to wait for them here. The man replied that he would wait, but asked what business a noble lady might have on these endless plains. In response, Elisha only smiled but did not answer, deciding that he did not need to know. Nora then asked if this was the land that Aryan was targeting, but it was unlikely that there was anything valuable there. As she sat down on her knee, it seemed very strange to her that not a single blade of grass grew in this place. Alicia thoughtfully agreed, when suddenly her bracelet immediately pulled her hand forward and began to ring very loudly. The girl felt a nagging pain, and suddenly the bracelet broke completely and stopped making sounds. Without wasting any time, Nora immediately grabbed her mistress by the hands to protect her from danger if necessary. Elisha noticed that the bracelet was broken, but she had received it as a gift personally from Lapis and Leslie. Then, with a slow, hesitant movement, she picked up the shard of bell and examined it. They said that this bracelet reacts to evil energy, but there are no signs of monsters here. Then it turns out that the thing Lapis made doesn't work correctly, but Nora wasn't so sure about it. The knight explained that this simply couldn't happen. Things made by Lapis and Leslie never broke. With a worried look, the girl concluded that if it wasn't about monsters, then it was just a simple coincidence. And just think that such a strange thing happened in the very territory that Aryan wants to get. If she knew a little more about this place, she would dig to the very end. But now she can't do anything. A few hours later, Nora stood before Lucerne, saying that this was the end of the Ladies' Day report. The general slammed the notebook shut, surprised by such a find, and Aryan's connection with a very suspicious land. Nora added that after she had accompanied the lady to the carriage, she had once again carefully examined everything. But I didn't find anything special. The only thing was that the lady slightly injured her wrist when the bracelet broke. It is her fault that she could not protect the mistress, and therefore she will gladly accept any punishment. Instead of getting angry, Lucerne said that it seemed his wife had discovered something interesting. Looking at the festively wrapped boxes, the man concluded that shopping alone was not enough for her. While delivering some book, Lucerne asked Nora where that land was located, asking her to tell him more precisely. The girl opened the book to the page with the map, pointing with her finger that this place was in this area. With a sharp movement, Lucerne threw the book into Ian's hands, asking him to get everything ready when he asked where he was going. In high spirits, he replied that his wife had prepared a gift for him, so he should check it out. Elisha remembered overhearing Carol say that Marco and his wife's stupidity had turned out to be their good fortune. It was lucky that he and Jacob didn't give up on the investigation halfway through, which is why they managed to obtain important information. The man replied that he had not expected that the land that Aryan so desired to obtain would hide such a secret. Taking her away, without disdaining any methods, was an excellent decision, which they do not regret at all. When Elisha woke up from her sleep, she immediately jumped up, seeing Lucerne near the doorway. She asked what she was doing there and why she wasn't sleeping, since it was already quite late and he was sitting in a suit. The man decided to ask in response whether she should first ask where he went while she was sleeping there. He then turned his attention to her bandaged wrist, saying that he heard that she had hurt herself. The girl replied that it was just a small scratch, and even if she had really gotten hurt, what difference would it make? The general did not know what to say to this, as his friend rose from his seat, ordering his wife to stand up. Then he turned around, and with a smile on his face, said that he wanted to show her the treasure that she personally found. After some time, they arrived in the desert lands. Ian was with them, holding a lantern in his hands. Elisha asked if anything had changed here since yesterday, and it turned out the shadows had discovered something. Releasing them again, Lucerne said that he therefore tried to cover the entire area with his magic. If vibrations appeared in it, it would mean that there were monsters or magic stones nearby. The vibrations did indeed appear, but as Nora reported, not a single monster was found nearby. But there is something else. After that, the earth began to crack, and the shadows began to lift the treasure out. Lucerne announced that they had found a secret device hidden here that looked like a safe. Ian suggested that the lady should not look further, but the general ordered to show it to her anyway. Lucerne smiled, saying that a person like her had every right to see it, since it was her discovery. Elisha looked questioningly at the men, trying to understand what they were talking about, but nothing came to mind. After this, Ian slowly opened the box and then shone a flashlight on everything, showing what was hidden there. When the girl looked inside, a mixture of horror and shock immediately appeared on her face, not expecting such a thing. Inside lay a dead man, who was the prophet Listramp, who had died 8 years ago. Lucerne said he personally checked for the blue tattoo that only appears on saints. There is no doubt that it is indeed Listramp in front of them, but therein lies the rub. Elisha realized that the pieces of bones that were sold in the temple did not actually belong to the prophet, and that it was all a deception. Marco's trading company has long monopolized the sale of relics, having secured the support of Uncle Merc. It turns out that with the help of this body alone, the mind can destroy both of them and deprive them of their right to inheritance. So this is what Jacob and his wife discovered in their past life. Elisha didn't expect that they meant this. Ian said bonds and a bank book in his name, and various treasures were found near the body. A high-quality magic stone was also found. In other words, this is Listramp's secret vault. Elisha asked with interest if it meant that he had committed suicide in his own vault. Lucerne denied this, saying that he had a stab wound on his stomach, meaning he had probably been killed. Looking at the girl, the man said that there were still plenty of mysteries, but one thing was for sure, it was she who found him. Elisha replied that she was lucky, but they had information that would allow them to strike Marco. The general hugged the girl, thanking her, adding that at the same time, he had a lot of thoughts spinning in his head. After all, he knows from his own experience that everything that is sweet always ends up being a trap. He suggested that they go back first, because he would be in good shape if his wife caught a cold or something worse. Lucerne decided to leave some shadows here so that no one else could suddenly discover him, even by accident. They will discuss all the other details upon returning to the mansion, where it will be much more comfortable. Elisha turned around, looking at the corpse and thinking that in her past life, Carol had taken the land that Arian wanted so much from her. Sitting in the carriage, she thought that this was not due to some special calculation, but just an ordinary whim. Carol herself, intending to build a country house in that area, went there only 4 years later. It was then that the wizard hired to help with the design, and who accompanied her, revealed to her the secret of the land. It was from this moment that Marco's influence began to crumble, putting his entire reputation at risk. Prophet Listramp was a low-class man with a large family who constantly required care. The man refused to donate his body, citing absurd conditions, and the temple was unable to sell his relics. Manhwa, unable to accept the refusal of some prophet from a lower class so easily, tried to kill him. However, the wounded Listramp hid in his vault and must have died from his wound inside. It seems that now all the pieces of the puzzle have fallen into place, and many secrets have suddenly become clear. Lucerne said that they say that the owner of that land was Listramp's secretary, who also distinguished himself. Not only was he his brother and looked like him, but he had also been missing for 8 years. Elisha asked if it meant that he had been sacrificed instead of Listramp, whose body could not be found. The general nodded, adding that the land would be put up for auction after several years of non-payment of taxes. Arian had no idea that the body was there, because if she had, she would have already decided to act differently. If she had known this, she certainly would not have sat still and calmly waited for the auction. She would have started to act. Elisha replied that since she could not find Listramp's body, there must have been some other factor at play. Arian was just going to take control of the land, because she had this nagging feeling in her head. But they don't need the land itself, so there was an option to just hide the body. But Lucerne said that it was impossible. He asked why the body of a man who died 8 years ago was still in the same condition. It's all because of the time barrier that only appears when magic and divine power collide. Only the magic stone and the power of the deceased are now maintaining the preservation of the corpse. If it is removed, it will melt. She did not see it, but the lower part of the prophet's body had already begun to melt. No one would be able to remove the body from that land. So, to sum it up, the first one who can get the land will also get Marco's weakness. The general did not answer, but only smiled, since Elisha herself answered the question. Later in the morning, Ian helped Elisha out of the carriage, told her they had arrived at the hotel, and she thanked him. The knight asked what he would order to be done regarding the land. Lucerne replied that he would give instructions a little later. He then added that first, he and his wife had an exciting conversation that required no delay. A few minutes later, they were already in the room, after which the general immediately asked how much she knew. Elisha replied that Arian was very keen to get a very unexpected piece of land, and Jacob and Carol understood this. The man smiled and assumed that she was warming her ears again near Jacob's office, because it couldn't be otherwise. The girl gave an affirmative answer. She didn't know the details. She just thought that some kind of conspiracy was brewing. Sitting down next to her, Lucerne said that everything she said made sense, and not without reason. Her story is certainly not perfect, but there seems to be no point in digging further, since they have already found everything they need. Then he asked whether he should again ignore it, looking at such a lovely pledge in the person of his wife. Elisha replied that she had merely followed Arian, and that he had found out the rest, just as she had planned. Then her eyes widened as the man remembered that she had met Marco at the reception yesterday. She asked if he suspected her of having a relationship with him. The general replied that it could be some kind of conspiracy. The smile disappeared from his face as he suggested that this might be a more intimate relationship with Marco. For Lucerne, she is still a suspicious person, so she needs to show that she is on his side. Letting go of his sleeve, Elisha frowned and said that she really wanted him to become the head of the family. If Marco or Jacob take this place, they won't leave her so easily because she won't receive any protection. Besides, she really thinks that he is better than the other grandchildren of the current leader, because he is a general who saved the country. There is nothing strange in giving preference to the strongest contender, who has every chance. The girl's words about wanting to be on his side were sincere, no matter what he suspected her of. Lucerne smiled slightly and replied that his wife was becoming sweeter and sweeter, because he had nothing to say in response to that. He can get over her being suspicious, but not knowing about her relationship with Marco makes his blood boil. Suddenly, he approached Elisha, asking in a mysterious voice what kind of contract he had finally made with her. The girl calmly replied that according to his conditions, she should make him the head of the clan and receive freedom. The general didn't expect any other answer, so he looked away, agreeing with her, because that's exactly how it was. Touching him, she added that if that was not enough, she could offer him her fidelity, and in the future she will never be as devoted to another man as she was to the general, no matter how much they try to convince her otherwise. That's why she asked him never to connect him again with a man like Marco, because he was disgusting to her. In the end, she added that just the thought of it made her sick, because she didn't like this person. The man replied that he understood everything, after which he asked how about a little kiss of peace. Hours later, Elisha lay in bed, wondering how it had all come to this again. Suddenly, Lucerne hugged her from behind, smiling and asking what his clever wife was planning next. The girl replied that first it was necessary to make sure that Marco and his wife did not find out about the secret in the ground. It is also necessary that they do not understand that they are going to take possession of this piece of land for a special reason. When asked how she wanted to do this, Elisha replied that the best option was to provoke Marco. Suddenly, Lucerne bit her, asking if she wanted to seduce him. Deciding that she still hadn't come to her senses, the girl blushed, saying that she had indeed spoken about seduction, but the general had not listened to her to the end. She didn't mean herself. He would have to somehow seduce Arian. Hearing this, the man frowned. Elisha added that she wanted to know some details before coming to the discussion. Then she, without wasting any time, asked what relationship connected him, Marco and the high priest Merhu. She knows that they are hostile to each other, but it is better to know the detailed circumstances for the future. The general replied that everything was exactly as she thought. In his childhood, living in the temple, he was tormented by his uncle Merka. At that time, Marco was also a teenager and could not beat him in any way. No matter what he did, he was always worse. Studying, archery, and even memorizing scripture, he was far better than him in everything. And every time Uncle Merka scolded him for this, once he was even caught when he wanted to start a fight with him. If Marco grew up constantly comparing himself to Lucerne, his weak point must be a sense of inferiority. The man added that he could never in his life become his rival, but only once he was afraid. That day, Uncle Mera scolded Marco very much, and then Marco put poison in his food, which was very mean. It wasn't fatal, but his vision was completely lost for a few days. But he didn't know it then. Fearing that he was going blind for life, he clung to the priests with prayers, but none of them helped him. Hearing this story, the girl's face looked shocked, as she did not expect him to tell such a thing. However, the first thing she decided to ask was what he had prayed for, and he replied that he didn't remember the details very well. Most likely he asked to be saved, saying that he could not see anything, but the clergy did not care. Elisha remembered running through the forest in her past life, while others shouted that they would get a reward for her. She ran blindly, with her eyes bandaged, but she wanted to live, because she could not die in this way. Her hands were tied, but she ran, when suddenly she came across a man and began to ask him to save her. She screamed that she could not see anything and begged for mercy just once, but the knight did not answer her. When Elisha fell silent, the man asked, "What was that?" It was Lucerne's voice. He was the one who collided with her. Elisha screamed that she knew nothing. She was only instructed to deliver a letter from Mrs. Carroll. Some time ago, Arian angrily threw a piece of paper at her, asking how Carol knew about the secret of the earth. Insulting Elisha, she said that she would cut off at least one of her hands tonight before sending her back. Holding a piece of cloth in her hands, Arian stated that if she wanted to save her limbs, she should try to escape. A little later, Elisha told Lucerne that if he pretended not to notice her, she would not forget his kindness. Without saying a word, the general reached for her hands and then freed her from her bonds, allowing her to escape. Then he leaned over, asked her not to show her eyes again, and put a coin under her clothes. When Lucerne left, the girl froze, thinking that she seemed to have heard this voice somewhere before. She wanted to look at her savior, but when she tore off the blindfold, she found no one around her. Suddenly, she noticed an old gold coin and decided that he had given it to her to pay for the cart. At that very moment, Elisha heard a young man shouting to the temple guards that they had come for revenge. Those who went in pursuit of her immediately recognized the knights and the Black Lion, which is why they decided to back down. Elisha thought that if there really were knights of the Black Lion here, then that man was definitely Lucerne. Now she finally understood the reason why he helped her then, since he himself was in a similar situation. The general looked at her, saying that he told her all this at her request, but she did not listen to him at all. Elisha lowered her head and replied that it was not like that. She just thought that the long-awaited time had finally come. Then a small smile appeared on her face as she said that they would pay Marco back for his blindness. A few days later, Lucerne asked if everything was ready, speaking about the so-called Elisha plan. Putting on the earrings, she replied that she had checked everything and that Marco and his wife would indeed be there that evening. He crossed his arms over his chest and asked with surprise and displeasure if this was all the jewelry she had. He explained that the noble ladies he knew usually hung a lot of jewelry around their necks and arms. Upset, the girl replied that she wanted to wear the bracelet given to her by Lapis, but it had recently broken. As for the necklace, she has a tracking tag on her neck anyway. There's no point in wearing anything else. At that very moment, as if reading his mind, Ian looked into the room, announcing to the general that the jeweler had arrived. Lucerne immediately demanded to be let in, and the surprised Elisha asked how long ago he had decided to call him. A few minutes later, the man asked to take his time and take a good look at everything, because he had selected the most valuable things. The general asked to see the most precious thing, explaining that this girl simply needed shock therapy. The jeweler offered a bracelet that received the highest estimate at last year's jewelry auction. Its advantage is that it fits perfectly on any hand, because the size can be adjusted thanks to the mechanism. He also added that it can be removed with the help of the husband, because this thing is the most real proof of love. When asked what she thought, Elisha said the shine and adjustability felt like handcuffs. However, Lucerne was of a completely opposite opinion, and so he smiled and declared that they would take him. He also asked to leave all the remaining jewelry here. His assistant outside would immediately write him a check. After placing the bracelet on his wife, he asked her if she would miss the bracelets she received from other men. The girl immediately became embarrassed, answering that Lapis was still a child, and she did not see him as an object of sympathy. The general explained that he was nevertheless a man, and therefore asked not to upset his husband with such things. He then put his arms around her neck, releasing shadows that began to very quickly hide the tracking mark. The man explained that he had hidden her mark with shadows, but it had not disappeared completely, just a small trick. Elisha was pleasantly surprised, and if Lucerne had known about the desire to hide her, he would have done so long ago. She never thought the day would come when the mark would not be visible, and she was happier about that than about the jewels. The general said that he fully understood her feelings, in response to which he heard sincere words of gratitude. Then he added that the ball would start soon, and he would follow her plan. But he had one small condition. She wondered what he had come up with this time, but the man said that she was forbidden to smile at Marco. Elisha decided to ask why he decided to follow her plan at all, if he didn't trust her so much. Lucerne replied that if it was a trap, it was still in his hands, so he had absolutely nothing to lose, after which he smiled, asking if they could go now, looking carefully at his wife. Elisha was a little embarrassed under his gaze, but deep down she was determined to move forward. A few minutes later, they walked into the hall hand in hand, and at that very moment, Elisha heard comments addressed to her. The girls told each other that this lady's outfit was very beautiful. This cape and bracelet were probably expensive. Elisha thought that Lucerne must have spent a lot of money, although why should she even worry about him? She said that their goal today was to strip Marco and Arian of their composure, and the man also agreed. Rumor has it that Arian is very proud, and she simply cannot stand it when people start comparing her to someone. So she conspiratorially asked her husband how he could treat her in the following way. After that, she leaned towards him, whispering in his ear about her plan in more detail so that he would understand everything. Lucerne was surprised, asking if he should go that far. Elisha replied that she had a personal score to settle with her. This answer surprised the general even more, but he did not ask any questions, only answering that he understood everything. He suddenly smiled that if this was his wife's, he would gladly play as dirty as possible. Trying not to look people in the eye, the girl thought that their glances were still burning into her, and this embarrassed her. She didn't expect that life would change so much, because now noble ladies honor her with their attention. At that very moment, she turned around, hearing a familiar voice say that a girl from the lower classes had arrived here. Then, he asked with a sly smile about how she, like that bastard, completely didn't know her place. Elisha asked him in response if everything was okay, because last time he looked like he was in a lot of pain. His face immediately twisted into a grimace as he asked her again what she had said, insulting her in the process. The girl remembered, saying that because of the proposal he made the other day, her husband became very jealous. She reminded him of the formation of the mistress and the next chapter. Marco became embarrassed and began to stutter. The girl explained that there was no point in worrying because her husband was returning exactly as much as he received. She then pointed to Lucerne, asking him to look at how they were now having a nice conversation with Arian. Elisha said out loud that she wondered what they were talking about, and hearing this, Marco became even more tense. A few minutes ago, Arian had been listening to the ladies asking each other if they had seen the general with his wife. The rumors were not lying. Their beauty really attracts attention, compared to other men of the Cartier family. At that very moment, Arian announced her presence, causing the other girls to immediately apologize. The girl frowned discontentedly and bit her lip, when suddenly Lucerne called out to her, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. While she looked at the general in surprise, others were envious that he had just greeted her. After all, they sincerely thought that the relations between the members of the Cartier family left much to be desired. Arian smiled, saying in a friendly manner that after his marriage, he began to attend such receptions more often. Suddenly, the man began to slowly approach her, answering in a low voice that it was not about marriage at all. It just seemed to him that she needed help lately, so he decided to kindly provide it. The girl blushed and became embarrassed, thanking him for the offer and replying that she did not need help. Lucerne decided not to retreat, approaching her as close as possible and whispering that he didn't think so. After all, he had heard that there was land that she wanted to get, and she had even made a fuss at the real estate agency. When asked how he knew about this, he replied that you can't get caught in what you really want. Then he said that Marco was courting his wife, so he also thought of taking away an expensive thing from her husband. And judging by the expression on her face, it would be much more effective to deprive him not of her, but of the land that he so desires. At that very moment, Elisha came up to them, grabbed him by the arm, and asked if they had enjoyed their conversation. Lucerne smiled, and I answered negatively, because compared to her, this woman was infinitely boring. Suddenly, Marco appeared between them and Arian, asking how he dared to mock his wife. The general replied that he would return the favor in the same coin, after which he asked her not to dare pester his woman. He then added that he had heard that he was going to build a new country house on land in Julefa. It seems he should get that plot of land and build a residence for his wife to teach him a lesson. Elisha asked if he would buy it in her name, since she wanted the land that Marco was going to buy for Arian. Putting their arms around their wife's shoulder, they both glanced at their interlocutors without permission, hinting at a challenge. At the end, Lucerne stated that they would meet at the auction, after which they left, leaving Marco and Arian in shock. A couple of days later, the whole city was trumpeting the latest rumors about the scandal with the Cartier family that had recently occurred. Some people were confused as to why they would choose to compete for a completely empty piece of land. It is said that the second grandson and the general are very or disorderly, deciding which of them will build a residence there for the wife. The price for this plot of land should already be very high, and after the auction, this sum will be absolutely enormous. His owner has disappeared, and the debts that have accumulated over the years are simply enormous, so all this must pay off. It's very similar to the Cartier family, who are always measuring their pride while throwing money around. People heard that this is a territory that no one needs, and it is not even a fact that there is a hot spring there. It turns out that this is a battle of momentary impulses, yet many were very surprised that the general got involved in it. It seems that men really do lose their heads when it comes to their women, if they are willing to go this far. Carol smirked slyly when she heard similar words from the girls sitting at the next table. The next day, Marco was slapped when Manhwa told him that he couldn't handle even a trifle. He had a bad feeling, so he told him to hurry up and buy this land quickly. He then angrily asked him what he was thinking, dragging Lucerne and, in addition, Jacob's wife into the bargaining. The guy replied that he tried to do everything in secret, but they were caught because of Arian and her carelessness. The man said that this bastard Listrump disappeared near that area, and they were never able to find his body. Marco said he couldn't be alive because he had stabbed him until he stopped breathing. He then asked if Manhwa still believed that Listramp's ghost was wandering alone in that area. The man interrupted him, ordering him to do everything properly when the bidding began, since the election of the Pope would soon take place. He must definitely take this post, only then will his future be guaranteed. But for now, they must work hard. As he thought, even while little Lucerne was living in the temple, he should have broken him back then. But neither hunger strikes, nor insults, nor even beatings frightened him. This made him a very poisonous bastard. If only the head had not recognized his stubborn thirst for life and taken him with him, the boy would have died in the temple long ago. But because of that incident, the leader began to look at him with disgust. Then he realized that he had made a mistake. After all, the head had previously given preference only to Stivan and Maklan, and now he had completely forgotten about him. Manhwa frowned, vowing that he would never lose so easily to the hated spawn of Maklan. At the same time, Elisha was sitting in the spring wind breathing cafe when she suddenly heard a familiar voice next to her. It was the princess who asked if she would mind if they had a cup of tea together. The girl smiled, inviting Ilion to the table, offering to treat herself to various sweets with tea. The princess said that she had been coming here a lot lately. Elisha replied that her husband had limited her walks. She also likes to watch people passing by, because that way you can understand how and where the capital is moving. Ilione was seriously surprised. thinking that this girl was much smarter than one might first think. And she is accompanied by Nora herself, who is considered one of the best even among the strongest knights of Lucerne. It seems that he is really in love with this girl. The princess asked if she could call her by name. She agreed, hearing that it was mutual, but replied that the status of a princess was noble for something like that. Ilione smiled sincerely and closed her eyes, thinking that she was so particular about formalities. Then the smile slowly faded from her face, as she said that she heard that they were going to bid. Ilione decided to suggest leaving the game for her own good and safety, because it was a very dangerous undertaking. The Cartier family people are quite scary, and they might even want to take her life for participating in this auction. Elisha replied that it seemed that Her Highness was very worried that she was a bad influence on the general. However, she knows what rumors are going around, because this time the general decided to personally join them. Ilion thought that everyone was saying that Lucerne had gotten himself a beautiful wife and was completely dazzled by her. The princess then asked if she was aware of what was happening, she should not stop the general even more. Elisha asked her not to worry, because he was not the type of person who could be so captivated by a girl. Smiling broadly, she added that she didn't want her husband to run away, like some kind of coward with his tail between his legs. The princess thought that even though she didn't particularly like Elisha, she was also against Lucerne being disgraced. She decided that nothing could be done, so she said that she would help her. This offer surprised Elisha. Ilione said that there are several fundamental factors in the struggle of aristocrats, and the first is appearance. Therefore, her appearance at the auction should simply scream about her confidence, and she will introduce her to the designer. Elisha immediately introduced Arian and Carol, who would take the choice of attire very seriously. She herself hadn't even thought about it, so she definitely needed to find out what those two would be wearing. The princess asked how she was going to figure something like that out, since the ladies' style battles were very difficult. In response to this, Alicia only smiled slyly, replying that she didn't think it should be too difficult. After that, they said goodbye to each other, and when Elisha went outside, she came up with an excellent plan. The girl asked Sophie if she could give her one task, and she answered with a smile that she would do anything. After that, she immediately began to point out the direction, saying that if she went to that alley, she would see a clothing store. There is a worker there named Lulu. She needs to give this, after which she puts a package in her hands. When the day of the auction arrived, Carol was the first to arrive, wearing a gorgeous, sparkling pink dress. The girls immediately began to discuss her, saying that it was quite difficult to argue with the beauty of the first daughter-in-law. At this time, the guard said that the knight could not go with her, and he would have to wait on the second floor. Her escort started to argue, but the girl said that she would be fine, and that she needed to follow the rules. At that very moment, a creaking sound was heard, and when Carol turned around, she saw Arian in a luxurious blue dress. However, the smiles immediately disappeared from their faces as they began to battle with their eyes, not intending to give in to each other. Now only the third daughter-in-law remained. Everyone was very curious to see if she had dressed up well for this. They didn't have to wait long, because a snow-white carriage arrived and slowly stopped next to the girls. When the door opened, Alicia came out. She was dressed in a white dress with patterns, and her hair was loose. Elisha remembered again how in her past life she visited Lulu when she had to pick up Mrs. Carroll's dress. After thanking her, she asked if she had done everything in the best possible way, as ordered, waiting for the dressmaker's answer. After all, last time she barely managed to meet the deadline, which made the lady very angry and took it out on her. The disgruntled girl asked if she meant to say that she could harm on purpose, making the work worse. Turning around, she added that it was annoying because ungrateful people always wanted so much from her. When Elisha arrived at the mansion, she announced a new dress, and Carol immediately wanted to try it on. When the maid helped her put it on, the girl felt something painfully prick her back. She immediately broke free and asked with displeasure what she was doing. The maid said that this was in the dress. She showed the pin, after which Carol asked Alicia if she intended to plant it to hurt. She immediately began to justify herself, while the mistress said that she would make her experience 20 times more pain. The reason Lulu was causing trouble was because Carol didn't leave her tips. This meant that it wouldn't be difficult to bribe this girl, which is what she did, sending her maid to her. Carol must have used the same trick to find out about Arian's outfit. It was obvious. So, once she gets information about the first one's payment, everything will become crystal clear with the second one's dress. And even though the things she was wearing were incredibly expensive, she didn't feel even a hint of modesty right now. The girl asked herself whether she should say that Lucerne's shock therapy had worked. People said that, judging by appearance alone, the winners of this auction would certainly be he and the general. Carol decided to go into battle first, after which she happily told Alicia that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and she missed them. She then added that a waiting room had been prepared for them on the top floor, and that they could go there together. Once in the room, Carol said she wanted to agree in advance that they would have any conflict. After all, it would be very stupid of them to compete with each other, throwing around such huge sums. Besides, Lucerne had already spent a lot of money covering her debt, so they didn't need any extra expenses. She was afraid and worried about her, that he would hate her if she wasted so much money again. In response, Alicia only smiled, saying that even if she gave in, Arian would definitely not make such concessions. The silent interlocutor winced, saying that she should not have egged Lucerne on in the first place. Alicia feigned surprise, asking if it wasn't Marco who had escalated the situation by asking her to become his mistress. Carol was genuinely surprised by such news, while Arian couldn't find anything to say in response. She then stated that the most important thing now was to clearly explain to her the difference in their situations. Carol agreed, because they were born aristocrats, and she couldn't gain status just by getting married. Elisha confirmed that they were true aristocrats, with deep history, knowledge, and good manners. Both girls proudly confirmed that they are exactly like that, and, unlike her, are on a different level. She added that Arian's family are 14th generation aristocrats, and Carol's family are 9th generation, which is a beautiful lineage. She then stated with a smile on her face that her family, Count Lore, were 24th generation aristocrats. The girls' reaction was not long in coming. They immediately jumped up at the same time, asking what she was talking about. In her past life, Arian despised Carol, saying that she was only a 9th generation aristocrat. But now she could not even imagine that what she saw then would be so useful to her to fuel their discord. Carol stated that she didn't want to be in the same room with her. Arian responded that their levels were completely different. Rising from her seat, Alicia declared that since they were saying so, she would go to the auction first. With a sly grin, Arian decided to tell her, after she left, that there was a place that suited her much better. Elisha turned around and frowned, thinking that she would not respond to every such taunt. Then she began to wander along the deserted corridor, trying to figure out in which direction the auction was currently taking place. Suddenly, she felt someone approaching from behind, but at that very second, the stranger covered her mouth. The guy dragged her into an empty room, threw her on the floor, and said that if she kept quiet, he wouldn't touch her. Then he took out a knife, threatening that if she thought about running away, there wouldn't be a single living spot left on her. The girl immediately began to panic when she suddenly decided that there was still some value in this land. More importantly, if she failed, she would definitely die, so she had to leave this room. If you think about it, the guards are not allowed to enter here, and it looks like the rope was prepared by them in advance. So it's most likely Carol or Arian's doing. They always manage to act more disgusting than necessary. Then she slowly rose from the floor, determined that there was no way she could give in and miss the bidding. She doesn't want Lucerne to brand her as a useless person, so she immediately snatches the whip from the stranger's belt. With a sharp movement, she tried to hit him, which resulted in her leaving a cross-shaped scar on his cheek. Elisha then started to run away, but a knife was immediately thrown at her back, hitting her in the left shoulder. The pain was sharp and unbearable, but she did not give up and continued to run, dropping drops of blood behind her. At this time, Arian said that right now this girl was probably shaking somewhere from fear and hiding. Then she asked how this girl dared to hurt the pride of their husbands. She needed to be shown her place. Carol tried to lighten the mood by saying that she hoped the auction wouldn't be too boring. The interlocutor decided to use a trick, politely asking how about giving up this lot to her. The girl asked in surprise why she should do this, and if there was anything important in this land. Arian replied that there was nothing special. She just didn't want to show Marco her incompetence. In exchange, she could give her anything, and such a proposal immediately interested the thoughtful Carol. After that, she began to whisper her wishes to her, which caused her interlocutor to be shocked by the request. Arian couldn't contain her emotions, ask if she's crazy, because this thing belongs only to the temple. Turning away, Carol asked her to forget, because she had a lot of money and she could spend it forever. Suddenly, the door behind them opened and Alicia walked in, breathing heavily and bleeding. She walked unsteadily towards the table, while a stunned Arian asked why she was here again. The girl didn't answer. I was only thinking about the fact that the bleeding wasn't stopping, which was not appropriate right now. Luckily, the absence of the presenter indicated that the bidding had not yet begun, and she had little time. Then she grabbed the tablecloth with her bloody hand and pulled it towards herself with a sharp movement. The dishes and food immediately fell to the floor, but now it was more important to somehow cover the wound to stop the bleeding. Having hidden the whip, Elisha asked if they had seen anything interesting, after which she suggested that they begin quickly. Arian said with displeasure that she didn't think she was in any condition to sit there and bargain. Carol, looking at her condition, agreed, adding that now was not the time for bargaining, because she was very scared. Arian never thought that she would be stabbed, but she knew that Lucerne would never let it go that easily. She said that she would only be at a loss if she ruined her health through this useless struggle. Alicia replied that she was there to protect her husband's pride and their honor, and she would rather die than lose. Moreover, she will definitely ensure that those responsible are held accountable for what happened to her. Meanwhile, Nora remembered that the general said that he could not attend because of the military council. This meant that she had to keep a good eye on her mistress, but that was very difficult right now. A few minutes later, the bidding began, after which the host announced that the starting price of the lot was 2,000 gold. Stunned people began to ask how this trash could be worth so much, as expected from the Cartier family. Nora, standing on the balcony, noticed that the lady looked worried, and Arian raised the bet to 3,000. Carol raised her hand next, doubling the amount without any hesitation to 6,000 gold. Arian asked her how she could offer such a sum, since she herself said that she did not know about this land. Deciding not to engage in a discussion with them, Elisha raised her bloody hand, raising the bet to 35,000. Her rivals were stunned by such a price increase, but Arian hesitantly increased it to 40,000. Elisha immediately raised it to 100. Seeing this battle, Carol decided that there was definitely something valuable in this land, so she decided to enter the battle with 105,000, and Alicia immediately outdid her with 200. Her rivals couldn't believe her determination, and the host asked the mayor what they would do. The man replied that the city government would not be able to handle such a sum, so they would have to wait a little. At this time, the two girls looked at Alicia in bewilderment, thinking that Lucerne had married her for a reason. Red with anger, Arian declared that this girl was truly crazy to offer such exorbitant sums. At this time, the presenter approached them and said that if a problem arose, they could stop immediately. Alicia thought the pain would become unbearable if it dragged on, so she suggested they start quickly. Loudly urging the presenter on, the girl made him flinch, causing him to stutter, suggesting that he continue. A couple of minutes later, Ariane, dissatisfied with what was happening, loudly declared that the auction needed to be stopped immediately. At that very moment, the stunned Nora looked closely at the lady, noticing blood on her shoulder and hands. Without wasting any time, she shouted that Lady Elisha was clearly not well, and then demanded that the bidding be stopped. The pale girl noticed the knight accompanying her, realizing that she could ruin her plan. Later in the evening, Elisha went outside, where she was met by a worried Nora, who immediately ran up to her mistress. Looking at her pale face, she asked why she decided to continue when she was seriously injured. After all, she had shouted for them to stop. Alicia replied that she had not expected her voice to be so loud. She then took out a hidden whip, asking the knight to support him, who looked at the weapon in surprise. Nora immediately realized where she got it from, after which she asked why the lady had entered into a dangerous battle. The girl replied that she could not accept defeat, because even her husband's knights did not have them. However, she won, and this is the most important thing now, since she single-handedly managed to protect her husband's pride. At that very second, a familiar carriage stopped in front of them. Both girls knew who would get out of it. Lucerne immediately came out of it, walking towards them with heavy steps. It was clear that he was very serious. Without further ado, he asked for an explanation of what had happened here, hoping for a detailed explanation of the situation. Alicia smiled and replied that everything ended well and she was able to get the land after all. Her last words were about success, after which she lost consciousness, falling right into the arms of the general. When they got home, the doctor said that the wound was not too serious, but several muscles were affected, so it will take time for a full recovery, so he will give the medicine to the servants before he leaves. When the door closed behind him, Lucerne sat down on the chair opposite the bed where his bloody wife lay. He sighed heavily, saying that if her goal was to drive him crazy, then she was clearly succeeding at it better than anyone. At that very moment, Alicia woke up, asked if the situation had been settled, and received an affirmative answer. She then asked him why he was angry then, and the man asked her why the hell she didn't stop the bidding. Slowly rising, the girl asked him if he was curious how much this land had cost her. When his knights successfully complete a task, does he treat them in the same way? Questioning and complaining? Lucerne didn't know what to do with her, but he certainly didn't want to praise her for this behavior and approve of such behavior in the future. The girl wanted to say that this was not what she meant, but the general interrupted her, ordering her not to sacrifice herself. Alicia instantly felt embarrassed, mentally asking herself why this man was looking at her like that right now. It felt like he was angry because he was worried about her. Then he asked for an answer, and the girl agreed. When asked if she remembered her attacker, Alicia said she had a scar from the whip she took from the criminal. It was made to a certain standard, the kind most likely only used in knightly orders. With this whip, she deliberately lashed that man twice on the cheek, horizontally and vertically, so the criminal can be identified by searching among the knights, Jacob and Marco, for a person with a similar wound. Lucerne decided to praise her, because in such a situation, she remained cool-headed and even managed to attack him. The girl thought that he did not intend to kill her, but simply wanted to lock her up for the duration of the auction, keeping her away. She suddenly realized that she had said too much, which led the man to conclude that she might not have received this wound. Alicia tried to object, shouting that then the plot would have gone to one of them, but certainly not to them. The general rose from his seat, declaring that he had let her go for a few hours, and she was returning in this state. Turning around, he asked her to be prepared to spend the next few days locked up and under close supervision. Alicia knew it was no use arguing with him, and now she had only gotten off with a long rest. A few days later, several people entered her room, among them a tearful Lapis. The knights came to visit her, displeasedly stating that the general had categorically not allowed anyone to see her for 2 whole days. Lucerne asked them to leave, but Ian replied that they, too, were worried about giving the lady a little break. Alicia spent the next few minutes chatting and laughing, enjoying the conversation in pleasant company. Lucerne sighed heavily, after which he heard the lady ask how she managed to get that plot of land. Corin said with surprise that now all the whole of Ulif does is gossip about this story with the land. The girl was also surprised, saying that the general had not even thought to inquire about these details. Then she smiled and said that it really wasn't that difficult, because she already had a plan. In the end, the plot was sold to them for 2,000 gold. Nora was surprised, because that was the price from which the auction began. Alicia replied that she had previously heard from the princess that the mayor of Ulif was in an unpayable debt to the general, because in the past, while still the mayor of a small town, he was saved by him from a monster attack. So, through the general, she asked the mayor for one favor, so he could not refuse her, and immediately agreed. She asked to briefly stop the auction and allow the bidders to temporarily discuss the matter if the price began to rise. Then the mayor said that the atmosphere was tense, so they would wait until the ladies cooled down and discussed everything among themselves. Arian said that now was not the right time to discuss it, since Alicia was in terrible condition. They were both overcome with fear, because if she died, they would have to take full responsibility for her husband. Alicia said that she was feeling dizzy, so it would be really hard for her to wait long for it to be over. So she suggested quickly determining the winner using a game or something similar, pointing to the cards. While the other girls looked at each other and thought about it, Alicia quietly marked the map. Carol thought that because of the bleeding, she must have lost all concentration, so she would be able to win. When everyone agreed, Alicia said that the person who drew the highest card would win. They had to take one card each, after which each pulled out her own and then looked at it. Arian had the 3 of clubs, Carol had the queen, and she drew a joker marked with her own blood. None of them could object to purchasing the land at the starting price of the auction, since the outcome of the auction was clear. Everyone immediately began to praise the lady, and Lapis asked why she chose the cards, since they might not have been there. She replied that at a party in Julif, she had learned that the mayor was an inveterate gambler, and that he must have had cards lying around. In addition, as a child, she often played cards in the orphanage, since they had practically no other entertainment. The winters were cold and long, when you couldn't go outside, and there was no other, more exciting activity to do. Of course, she had thought of 15 more possible scenarios, but everything went according to the original plan. Lucerne decided to stop telling stories about military exploits, saying that his wife needed to rest, so he kicked everyone out. Standing outside, Nora returned to the general, handing him the letter that had come to the lady, explaining that it had been sent by the chief. When asked why she brought it and not the maid, Ian replied that it was their cunning backup plan. After all, they originally wanted to use the letter as an excuse if he did not allow them to visit the lady. The small postcard contained words of congratulations on the victory for the girl who personally achieved it. Ian said that 100 roses were sent with the letter, and Lucerne ordered them to be burned and thrown away. After closing the door, he returned to Alicia, crossing his arms over his chest, deciding to ask her directly if she wanted to become the chief's wife, because he simply saw no other reason to go so far and sacrifice himself, and now he could not understand it. Elisha answered negatively, saying that her condition was the same. She would leave as soon as he became the head of the family. She just wants the best person to get this place, and for Jacob not to be able to harm her in any way. If he thinks she is useful, he can simply pay her well for her efforts when she leaves. The man replied that he had a very good sense, and he clearly understood that she was definitely not Jacob's spy. But he was sure that she was lying to him, although he didn't know exactly what. But there were obvious omissions in her speech. She is constantly trying to prove something to him, and probably wants revenge on Jacob, who is guilty of her father's death. The girl looked down and thought, as she had never asked herself whether she even wanted revenge for her father. She was willing to do anything to avoid a terrible future, but after being under Lucerne's tutelage, greed was born in her. After all, everyone around her was so nice to her, and the people in the mansion respected her, and this instilled a sense of satisfaction in her soul. And this man, although a little complex, is completely different from those who saw her as only a pitiful insect. At least Lucerne treats her like a woman and tries to please her in everything. She said that if there was one thing she wanted to prove, it was that she was a human being, not a commodity or a slave, but a human being. The girl concluded that she simply wanted to live. The general listened to her attentively, thinking over these strong words. Rising from his seat, he asked her not to provoke her any further, as he was becoming increasingly determined to possess her. Elisha hesitated slightly and decided to ask her husband what would happen next if he were to succeed in taking possession of her. He grinned and approached her, and replied that she would live as his property, forever, under control. Biting her lip, she asked why he was angry with her, since she tried not to do anything that could upset him. Lucerne replied that he didn't even know. Apparently the problem was that the value of the collateral was continuing to increase, and this gives him a burning desire to kiss her, even when she is in such a weak and helpless state. A few weeks later, Elisha was walking around the yard when the maid asked if she was sure she could go out for walks. The girl replied with a smile that she had almost recovered, and the doctor recommended that she start moving a little. Although it was strange that she was not getting better, even despite treatment from famous priests and doctors. She also hoped that Lucerne would not force her to later compensate for all the costs of her treatment and rehabilitation. Suddenly she froze, noticing the general in front of her, who appeared as if from nowhere, clearly waiting for her. He invited her to take a short walk, after which he decided to ask how she was going to promote him further. Elisha asked permission to meet with one person, and without any hesitation, Lucerne gave his consent. She decided that he knew who she was going to meet. The man replied that he had 2 options. He then began to whisper these options softly into her ear, causing her to become embarrassed, not expecting such closeness. When asked if he had guessed correctly, Elisha, amazed by his insight, replied that everything was exactly like that. Then she asked how things were with the payment for the land in Julif. Lucerne replied that everything had gone without a problem. To prevent anyone from entering the area, close and constant surveillance of the site will be established. She just has to decide how spectacularly they'll expose their weakness to eliminate them from the game. Elisha thought that they were clearly on the same wavelength and could be considered even more villains than Jacob and Carol. At that very moment, she remembered that there was a chance that she would soon have to spend some money, which she told her husband about. With an indifferent look, the general replied that he would allocate her a budget for cash expenses that she could use. He will look at the recordings later, so she does not have to ask permission for every step she takes in the future. She was lucky that Lucerne turned out to be a more generous person than he might seem at first glance. She turned around in surprise when he stated that he also had one small condition in return. With the utmost seriousness, he demanded to be called by name, and Elisha fulfilled his whim. Then her gaze turned to the sky, after which she said that if she thought about it, the day of the moon would soon come. The time when the moonlight reaches its maximum brightness is when everyone will go to pray in the main temple. The girl asked permission to go there, because since childhood she has tried not to miss this important event. The general replied that there would be too many people there, so no, but the day after tomorrow they could go there together. Elisha was a little embarrassed, then told you that it wasn't really a request to go together, but there was nothing to be done. 2 days later, the Knights of the Black Lion examined the bloody whip of the man who had attacked the lady. Ian, who led them, said that the general did not dare to allow them to avenge her officially. He said that the thing was used by a criminal, but from what he said, he wanted them to take care of it. Nora said that they did some investigating and found out that it was an old model of the whip of the knightly order at the temple. If he was from there, then Marco was the instigator, and the female knight loudly slammed her fist on the table in anger. Lasley assumed that the attacker had probably already escaped, but he was told that they had already dealt with that too. They were informed that a knight from the temple with a scar on his face was heading to the border, and they captured him in an inn. In short, the evidence against the criminals who dared to injure their dear lady was collected, after which Ian asked the others what they would do next. The knights began to look at each other, but the next second, the same thought came to them, causing evil smiles to spread across their faces. A minute later, fully armed, they went out into the street, heading towards the temple, deciding to give them a beating. After 20 minutes, one of the temple knights felt the glove that had just been thrown to him on his cheek. Lapis stated that they had harmed their mistress, so they came to beat them up for it and challenge them to a duel. The boys who looked down on him said that the boy was completely out of his mind to suggest such a thing to them. Grabbing him by the chest, the knight asked how dare a puppy like him bare his teeth so fearlessly at adults. Suddenly he froze, noticing its shape, because it was a certain shape of the Knights of the Black Lion, and the teenager among them is Lasley, the most powerful mage in the Empire, which is why the soldier let him go. The wizard, stunned by what he heard, felt insulted, declaring that he was actually Lapis. He then lit a flame on his finger, saying that he had once burned 400 monsters and then offered to roast them. He then announced that he wanted to set a new record today, and a few seconds later, there was an explosion in the building. The other knights standing outside noticed that Lapis had already started without them, and he was having the most fun. A disgruntled Lasley said that if the lot had fallen differently, he would now be the one declaring war. Ian smiled, saying that he understood their frustration, but from now on, the real battle begins. He then filled his sword with magic, stating that if everything was ready, they could join Lapis. Meanwhile, Elisha and Lucerne visited the temple, and the girl noticed that there were almost no people there today. The man replied that the peak of power occurs precisely on the day of the moon, so there is no particular point in coming here earlier. After all, she herself initially wanted to come on that day, but now she decided that this way her wish would come true. Elisha answered negatively, explaining that here she felt much calmer and safer. People do say that wishes made on the moon day come true, but the world is definitely not that simple. For the next couple of minutes, Lucerne watched his wife carefully, who was completely focused on her desire. Then she looked back sharply, smiling and asking if he wanted to try it, but he wasn't interested. Then the girl asked why he came with her at all, since it would have been enough to send the maid. The man replied with a smile that he was afraid that she would get into trouble again if he looked away. After all, Whoever discovered the body was wandering around and sniffing around, or whoever returned home with a stab wound. Then he said that their family life was so cheerful. It was all filled with excitement. But Elisha was interested in something else. She asked if it meant that he had never prayed, and the general replied that he had tried a couple of times as a child. The temple was such a boring place that he had to do at least this much, but he still remembered his request. He asked that the mother who raised him be born again and no longer suffer as she had in this life, and so that if she really were to be reborn, she could live without having any connection to their family. Alicia replied that it was a wonderful wish, and next time she would definitely pray for his mother. Suddenly, she asked herself, when they got divorced in the future, would he one day ask the same thing for her? Lucerne asked her to take a little rest. The girl asked in surprise, didn't they need to go back? The man replied that she had not yet fully recovered, so she should not go in the carriage right away. It would be better to go to a cafe. At that very moment, she remembered that they hadn't been able to have dinner last time, which gave her a sense of déjà vu.